my fellow Westorians. Happy Sunday, happy Father's Day, as it turns out. We are in between our great Valar Rereadus journey. We're starting Dunk and Egg next week. We've just finished the Winds of Winter. It's the perfect time to do something different, a different kind of topic. We've got something fun prepared for you today, and we're going to start it off with a quote.
The properties of Valyrian steel are well known, and are the result of both folding iron many times to balance and remove impurities, and the use of spells, or at least arts we do not know, to give unnatural strength to the resulting steel. Those arts are now lost, though the smiths of Qohor claim to still know magics for reworking Valyrian steel without losing its strength or unsurpassed ability to hold an edge. The Valyrian steel blades that remain in the world might number in the thousands, but in the Seven Kingdoms there are only 227 such weapons, according to Archmaester Thurgood's inventories, some of which have since been lost or have disappeared from the annals of history.
As the series heads towards a more direct conflict with the armies of Winter and the others themselves, Valyrian steel seems likely to gain even greater relevance to the story. With, quote, 227 such weapons, as it says, George R. R. Martin has gardened himself quite a few options. A lot of Valyrian steel seedlings there, you might say. He can have certain houses emerge to fight the great threat or stand on the sidelines loudly complaining about it or something like that. Either way, we might see their long-prized ancestral weapons brought up or used in ways they never imagined. And I don't just mean against the others, mind you, but perhaps even against dragons. One of the swords we'll discuss today is said to have sliced a wing from a dragon. Wow, right? And hey, let's not forget giants and krakens and whatever else. And of course, any Valyrian blade that emerges may simply be used in human versus human conflicts, too. We certainly get a lot of those. So let's not forget about that possibility. After all, the first Valyrian steel blade we see in the series does a little bit of damage to a few people. So we'll be talking about that one briefly as well. So hello and welcome, everyone. We are back. We are excited to have an excellent topic for you all today. And to help us discuss this fun topic, it is our pleasure to introduce our guest, Tommy of the TKOK Podcast Network and New Dad Podcast. How's it going, my man?
It's going good. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. This has been a dream of mine for a really long time. History of Westeros, my favorite podcast. And so being on this is pretty surreal. What better way to celebrate and spend Father's Day than listening to two dudes compare their swords?
Well said.
You know?
And thank you for that, Tommy. That means a lot. Yeah, we were glad we could get to do this. And it's been fun hanging out with you in the past at cons and just talking about A Song of Ice and Fire. And yeah, you're a great part of the fandom. And it's cool that you got your own show now, too. Like, I know we've brought it up and mentioned it a few times, and I've done an appearance on there. Why don't you spend a minute and give everybody a little longer description of what you're doing over there?
Yeah, so it started with New Dad. That's was the first podcast I started hosting. That was right around the beginning of 2020, and just talking about my experience as a dad and highlighting other who I believe are amazing dads on the show and cool stories. Aziz was on there. He's not a dad, but we also talk about unusual. Yeah, he's a cat dad. Unusual upbringings. Anything parenting related. We'll kind of jump into parenting topics. So that's where it kind of started. I had a very much like Daenerys the Dreamer. I had a prophetic dream one night that I started a podcast network, and that podcast network led to some professional success. So I woke up that morning, called up a friend who's a fellow content creator, Kate Flynn, who is married to one of my best friends and the host of Pop Moms podcast.
Nice.
And I said, hey, I had this dream that we started this together. What do you think? And she said, let's do it. So that resulted in a second podcast, the TMC podcast, which is airing right now. It stands for the Movie Club. And really what it is, the idea is it's like a book club, right? So our listeners pick a movie, and then you got about 2 weekends or 10 days to watch that movie. And then an episode airs, a live stream where I am joined by some fantastically talented guests to talk about that movie and break it down. So
nice.
That's airing now. Our next episode is the 28th of this month. And we're actually our guests are two people that should be near and dear to the Song of Ice and Fire fandom. We have Dom and Daisy, so King Robert and Prince Joffrey.
That's excellent.
from the Westeros musical.
And what movie?
And people
are you
here
guys
in our chat would know Dom from our chat.
That's true.
And actually, they will know him as Makoro from the Winds of Winter audio play, Victorian. So he's all over the place.
He pops up.
He
all
is.
over
He
the
is.
place.
Yeah, and so they are the hosts of so you guys are my favorite podcast ever, right? You guys are pretty staunchly entrenched at the top. My favorite new podcast, the one that I'm most obsessed with, it's one of those ones that came on my radar, and it's like, oh, this is something new, and it's bringing all this great new information to my life. Is Folkwise Live that Daisy and Dom host on Tuesday nights. So yeah, you may be familiar with them from that as well. But really excited. We're talking about "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" The Coen brothers.
So fantastic! I love that.
Yeah,
movie
Z's quotes and sings from that movie a lot. I love that movie as well. We were just talking about how it's been like 10 years since I saw it, so it's a good time to rewatch it.
I just played several songs from the soundtrack not 3 days ago. In the Jailhouse Now, and even You Are My Sunshine, their version.
And listeners of History of Westeros of us here will also want to check it out because Sean of House Beard covered The Graduate. A month or so ago. So yeah, check that out.
And there are some talks happening where maybe someone from this podcast might eventually show up on there.
Yeah, I'm tempted to do it, but Tommy insists that I submit 4 movies, and I really just want to do one. So I need to figure out how to stack the poll so that no one votes.
To rig the game. That's right. Well, you know what? And I told you, Ashaya, be careful with that because I've done that and it's backfired. So just be careful. Just be careful. It's hard to control the populace.
Yep. Try to control the vote, and it just never goes right.
But yeah, no. Outside of that, TKOK Podcast, it's a network. We're constantly adding more. The plan is to add some more stuff down the road. We have another podcast that I'm working on. Eat God, See Acid, that has to do with hallucinogenics and people's experiences. And really, the reason that hasn't come out yet, I had a bunch of interviews recorded with a professor from a university, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to get him in trouble. We were ready to air, and then he came back and said the university actually does not want him to go on air. So we're back at the drawing board with those. I'd like to lead with kind of a more scholarly take before we get into the personal anecdotes and experiences. So that is coming. That's down the road, but so. We have a Facebook group too. That's what I should also mention. That's the other big thing. Come over there. That's where we vote for our movies, and that's where you'll get a lot of news on the new upcoming podcast.
Gotcha. All right, that's great, everyone. Yeah, everyone take note and check out TKOK and enjoy some movies and some of the other stuff we got going on.
Yeah.
Corinna Strick sends a super chat from New Zealand. Fist bump sticker. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And also want to shout out to our first sword. That would be Jeff Gnarly, the Long Snapper. And he is a staunch supporter of the show. Want to make sure he gets his due. Let's get going. There's enough to say about Valyrian Steel to cover several episodes, even if we were to really narrow things down. Today, we're going to do our best to focus on some particular items. We're not going to talk too much about the origins and magical side of Valyrian Steel. It's definitely going to come up. You can't not talk about that. It's also pretty fun, but it's not going to be our focus. So we're going to focus on specifically known items. Not all of them are going to be swords. A lot of them will be. And that is where we'll start. And building on Tommy's comment about two dudes comparing their swords, we will start with some sword porn. We'll start with Brightroar. Yeah, Brightroar. Now, think about Tywin. He probably wouldn't have melted down ice if not for the loss of this sword by his long-gone ancestor. We have a dude named Tommen II. He took his fleet to Valyria not long after the Doom. He thought it was a good opportunity to find lost treasures. In theory, it's not a totally bad idea. Maybe this was 300 to 400 years ago. I mean, when big ancient empires explode, don't you first think of going to loot their treasures? It's a rational thought, right? It's a pretty normal thing to do. So we have these records that come through. Volantis says he stopped there. He was well received by the Triarchs, given many gifts. He promised to give half of what he found. So it doesn't seem like they would have done anything to him because they would have benefited from whatever happened. But he was never seen again. And that's interesting because this isn't just one ship. This is several ships. They all vanished. And that's that's a lot of people and ships to vanish. He sent they sent ships to look for him and found nothing. Now, what would he do with all this stuff? This is a big question I have. What would a Lannister king and or Volantene nobility do with Valyrian treasures, other than the obvious, hey, look how fancy we are with all our cool stuff? Is there more of a purpose to it than just, hey, let's get some cool loot? I would think so. What do you think, Tommy? Does this feel to you a little bit like Euron Greyjoy and the way he's sort of decking himself out in the trappings of old Valyria and things like that? Does this kind of feel familiar to you like that?
Yeah, it feels like that. It just feels like someone who it reminds me a lot. So my son just celebrated the 3rd birthday, right? He got a lot of presents. Those presents aren't enough. It just kind of whets the appetite. He wants more, it's almost as if the presents are just create a hunger for more presents.
Interesting.
So that's the trouble we've been going through this weekend is just, everything he sees, he wants to go get toys. So I think and I have no experience being this wealthy, right? But I feel like once you get to this point where you just, you're literally sitting on a mountain of gold, right?
Literally, yeah.
Literally, it's just kind of this thing that, it's a hubris thing, right? You're so far removed from reality or just the pitfalls of life that you think, well, nothing can hurt me. I'm going to sail into the smoking sea, and all this is mine, because that's kind of the mentality that these people who have everything, there's no limit to what is theirs when you have that sort of money. And so they look at this as theirs.
It makes a lot of sense. He feels entitled, and he knows that it would take a large investment to retrieve any of this value from there. So that for him, it sort of sets him apart. It's like, I'm one of the only people in the world that could even do this. So that probably feels that sense of entitlement. That's a really good point you make about the more you give, the more they want, because that is very much a part of, seems like, how Euron has sort of bribed his people. He's like, look, follow me, and I'm going to keep giving you loot and feed your hunger for that. And of course, this is a culture that is already very hungry for that. So he's like a drug dealer, just giving them the drug they've been asking for. And it works, right? Like the Ironborn are totally his to this point.
Well, also, when you have that much money, right? Like, money starts to lose its value a little bit.
Yeah.
What is a gold worth? 10 gold dragons? What is that to someone like Tommen, right? Nothing. But the kind of folklore that rises up about someone who is able to go to Valyria and return and have all these gifts, that's something that you can't buy, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, as you said, it sets him apart, right? And that's something that, I guess at that point, that's what that's how when you have that much, right? What else do you want? Well, I just want all of the respect. I want all of the adoration. I want all of the glory.
Yeah, and it's possible this King Tommen II had designs of expanding his kingdom or going, or perhaps that's selling it short. Maybe he wanted to be something like an Aegon the Conqueror, which of course hadn't happened yet. There were still 7 kingdoms, so he could have potentially gotten a leg up in wealth or prestige, and that could have perhaps enabled him to move forward with some conquest, maybe taking the Reach or taking the Riverland, something like that. And maybe he had dreams to go beyond that. And that's entirely possible. It fits very well with what you're saying in terms of this level of more, and what is gold when you have so much. So what's the next best thing? Power or ancient treasures?
Adoration, fear.
Yeah, like all these things. And an interesting theory from Nina that Tommen, when he, the man who went to look for the sword, Brightroar, that's of course the key here. He took the sword with him, which maybe he shouldn't have done that. But again, we have this hubris theme going here, and why would he leave it at home? Why would he be worried? What's he worried about? Everything's going to work out great. Of course, he's Tommen. He's king of the rock. Of course, it's going to work out great. So Jaerion Lannister goes there to look for Brightroar. It's sort of like connecting the dots. It's like one guy goes to look for Valyrian treasures and loses Valyrian treasures. So then another guy has to try to dig them out of the hole, but he falls into that hole, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is like, just as a dad, it's hard. hard to not see the parallels. This is like your kid, he wants to go to an amusement park and he wants to bring his favorite toy. That toy's getting lost, but try telling that to a kid, who just loves the toy and wants to bring it with him. He's obsessed with this thing. Like, it's just, it's comical, to the point of almost absurdity.
And this really fits in well with the family structure here. If we go back to first, we don't know much about Tom in II, other than that he was big on this idea. And but we know a little more about Jerian. That's, Tywin's youngest brother. And everyone talks about how Tywin was just so outstanding, stood so much taller than all his brothers. And it's remarked that Garion was the one who just didn't play the game. He saw how far behind he was and just mocked the game. He had more in common with Tyrion. And maybe this is related to that. Maybe this is just, he wanted to sail off and make something himself, do something that even their ancestors failed at, something that even Tywin can't say that he's done. So just some way to make a name for himself within this big, powerful, storied family. Something that they had failed at before. So that really would make a name for him if he had succeeded. What do you think if Jerian had succeeded? It's kind of a tough what if to consider, but it would have been a really, really big deal.
Well, yeah, and I think we'll get to this in a little bit. There are some theories that believe that he did succeed to a certain degree.
Sure, yeah.
Also, maybe he just wanted to get the fuck away from Tywin. It doesn't seem like a very pleasant person to be around. And considering, what we do know about Garion, he named his ship the Laughing Lion. He was, very prone to being kind to Tyrion when a lot of people weren't. It's just like, why am I going to stick around here with this sourpuss when I can go and explore and make a name for myself? Garion's really interesting to me, and it's one of those where we have just enough information where you can get wild with theorizing, but not enough textual evidence to really make any strong arguments.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you say, because how is he going to make a name for himself with Tywin around? The only thing he's going to do is get to do what Tywin says. That's really, right. Like Kevin. He's going to just become another Kevin, but less Kevin than Kevin, because Kevin's been Kevin for longer. So even that isn't there for him from his perspective, right. I guess you could say. So there's a lot of family in this. There's a lot of like, I'm the forgotten youngest brother. I got to do something, And
he's so unlike the others, right? Yeah. It's just like he's such a black sheep. That's where is his place there? Probably nowhere. He kind of figured out the math real quick and was like, I got to get out of Dodge.
So fun theory by Nina: the year Tommen, our current Tommen, as in King Tommen, was born, is the same year that Jerian left on this quest. And her theory is that he was named for Tommen II, and this was somewhat related to this mission, perhaps, maybe just in honor or just a connection. It could just be a random, but I like the idea.
I love the idea, and I think, imagine Garion seems to be everyone's favorite uncle, right?
Yeah.
He seems like a fun, awesome guy that was just probably a real bright spot in a gloomy, dark Casterly Rock, right?
That makes a lot of sense. They probably missed him when he left.
Yeah, and also there's probably, as kids, right, a belief that this, like this gregarious uncle of ours, he's going to be the one that goes and does this, and Tywin's lusting for Valyrian steel is well noted in the series. We see what he does with ice. But yeah, it's just, I think that there was a real belief, amongst the Lannister children that Garion was going to succeed in his task. And
that's a really good thing you point out, that he's about his brother, because we've talked about how there's just no pleasing Tywin, but this might have done it. If Jerian had succeeded and brought back a Valyrian steel blade, because as you say, Tywin tried so hard. He's money's no object to this guy. The sums he must have offered to houses for their swords must have been just staggering. Yet they clearly all said no. So yeah.
And even just Brightroar itself, like, its history, like they said they paid enough to raise an army, right?
Yeah.
So, that in and of itself tells you just how valuable it was.
So it really would have been quite a coup for him if he had succeeded. So maybe you're right that we can discuss the possibility he's still alive, but it doesn't seem like he got the sword.
No.
Because he would have definitely wanted to come back and show it off.
You would think, yeah.
Now, we actually do have a quote of Brightroar in action, and it's fittingly an example of the Lannisters trying to expand their power. Here is a quote. Do you have this one ready here?
Yep. Yet it happened that while King Giles was away, the King of the Rock saw his chance to tear a bite out of the reach. So he gathered up a host of Westermen and came down upon us. The Ospreys were the marshals of the North March, so it fell to the little lion to meet them. It was the fourth King Lancel who led the Lannisters, it seems to me, or mayhaps the fifth. Sir Wilbert blocked King Lancel's path and bid him halt. Come no farther, he said. You are not wanted here. I forbid you to set foot upon the reach. But the Lannister ordered all his banners forward. They fought for half a day, the Gold Lion and his Chequet. The Lannister was armed with a Valyrian sword that no common steel can match. So the little lion was hard pressed, his shield in ruins. In the end, bleeding from a dozen grievous wounds, with his own blade broken in his hand, he threw himself headlong at his foe. King Lancel cut him near in half, the singers say. But as he died, the little lion found the gap in the king's armor beneath his arm and plunged his dagger home. When the king died, the Westermen turned back and the reach was saved.
So that, of course, is also a nice little segue to what we've got coming for the next several weeks, which is the fun of Dunk and Egg. And this is a quote from Dunk and Egg. It's from The Sworn Sword. This tale is told by one of the protagonists, and he is a very, very proud of his house. Of the little lion is a descent as an ancestor of his. So we see Brightroar in action a bit, at least a story of it. And one thing we can learn from this is as well that usually the swords go back to their family, even when they're won in combat. There's sort of a maybe a understanding between a lot of the noble houses that you give these back. It doesn't
A
always
gentleman's
happen.
agreement.
It definitely doesn't always happen. Tywin is a perfect example, but most of these swords seem to find their ways back to the houses that have held them for centuries. So,
and that's important to note for some of our later swords we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So there's another more about Jerian here. Let's see here. This idea that he failed and his ancestor failed, yet Euron succeeded, or at least partially succeeded. He certainly has treasures of Valyria, and it's not necessarily true that he personally walked on Valyria, but that he sent slaves in to do it for him, not unlike how the Valyrians themselves sent slaves down into the horrible mines that many people died in. And that feels somewhat similar. This the lava landscape and sulfur and death, and but Jerian himself, we're told, did hire slaves too, yet it's just still didn't work out for him. Maybe he wasn't, it's not Euron's level of brutality, or you can't force them as much as he did. We are really left with pure guesswork on how Euron seems to have succeeded, yet Tommen and Jerian did not. I really don't have any guesses that why Euron succeeded and they didn't. I really don't know what is different. He's a better sailor, but I don't know if that's enough to explain it. Do you have any guesses at all, Tommy, or do you have any thoughts on this? It's so mysterious.
I do, and I don't know if we want to hit on it yet because it involves one of my theories, or one of the theories I enjoy. It's not my theory that I enjoy regarding Brightroar coming. Do you want me to hit on that now?
Let's do it now. Yeah.
So, for what, and I should also preface this by saying, I'm pretty nervous today. I'm following up what I consider a pretty impressive lineup of guests. Just this whole TWOW chapter, the Valar Rereadus for the sample chapters, Concepcion, Nina for real. So I'm clearly going to be the dumbest person that has ever been on great. History of Westeros, let alone for sure in the last couple of weeks.
No, that's Aziz. That's
always me.
No,
yeah, that's always me.
that's far from the truth. But so one thing where I lack my own smarts, I make up for in just familiarity with theory, like community theorizing. One of my favorite theories, and I just call it the titty twister theory, because it's the originator is a Reddit user, Valyrian the cat, and I did check Westeros.org. I didn't see any sort of theory. That's always and I just want to say that because I think people who are doing research for this, when you're doing your A Song of Ice and Fire research, I think there's a chronological order in which it should be done. So stop at Westeros.org. It's been around a little longer. See what sort of theories sort of are on that form and the dates, and then go to Reddit.
That's a good shout out, yeah, because there are so many quote unquote new theories out there on the internet that are not new. They were posted on Westeros.org 10, 20 years ago. That was my first experience going to Westeros.org in like 2004. I was like, oh, look at all these new ideas I have. I'm going to show these people some. I was Jon Snow. I knew nothing. That's what I realized pretty quickly.
100%. And you know, I should say this too. I mean, it's a little bit off topic, but you know, my A Song of Ice and Fire dream, outside of being on History of Westeros, which is now accomplished, you know, so check that off the bucket list. But it's to come up with my own original theory, right? It's like and there's very much a part of this that feels like the South Park episode Simpsons did it, where every time I think I have a great idea or a great theory, I go and look at Westeros.org or Reddit, and I'm like, oh, Simpsons did it. It's already been covered. Someone smarter than me has come up with this. So the Titty Twister theory. So for those who aren't familiar with From Dusk Till Dawn, the Titty Twister is a bar that is kind of like a Venus flytrap. It lures people in, and it ends up being this essentially a death trap, right? It's run by it's a vampire bar. So normal people come in there and they're murdered. So the Titty Twister theory, you know, kind of theorizes that Volantis is not this altruistic, you know, city-state that they make themselves out to be. The fact that, you know, kind of what you're talking about. You asked, why did Euron succeed and perhaps Tommen and Geryon were not able to? Well, Euron has his own slaves, right? He makes his own slaves. Geryon and Tommen both stopped in Volantis and had to restock their crew with slaves from Volantis. So these could be slaves who are loyal to the folks at Volantis. Volantis is also a city that is kind of shrouded in secrecy, right? We don't know a lot about what goes on in the inner circle.
Yeah.
And the only records we have about Brightroar, you know, in regards to Tommen and Geryon, are from the Volantene. So that to me is suspicious, right? So the theory goes that the Volantene kind of act like this, hey, come on in, we'll treat you, we'll dine you. You guys are going to Valyria, kind of see what your intentions are. Oh, we know what's going out there. We know what the Smoking Sea has. We know it's, so we'll help. We'll say we'll help you. We'll say, you know, whatever you need. You know, we'll even send a search party out for you if you get lost, right? But what really happens is the minute you leave and you get off seas, these slaves kind of turn. They're kind of taught to just, hey, we're going to murder everyone here, take whatever riches that they do have, and you know, and it's important to kind of just really kind of drill home the point that the Lannisters' wealth, this was something that was, you know, it's not something that was just known about in the Seven Kingdoms, right? This was something that was known about worldwide. Everyone knew that the Lannisters, you know, like I think there was a quote in Fire and Blood or the World Book where it's like when people from Essos would meet someone from the Seven Kingdoms, they would ask if the Casterly Rock people really lived on a mountain of gold, right?
Yeah.
There's something along those lines. So it's like, it's well known, like these people are filthy rich. So when these Westerland kings start showing up in you know, Volantis, and they're saying, hey, we're going to go to Valyria and we have this boat full of stuff. And, you know, it's like, I think those could be easy targets. I'm saying it's still improbable. My guess is Tommen and Geryon are dead, right? That it's just, they just didn't succeed. But out of all the theories that I've read about Brightroar, this one I like a lot because if the Volantene did kill Tommen and then they kept all of his treasures, including Brightroar, and then Geryon stops in Volantis saying, I'm going to do the same thing, and he meets the same fate, there is this idea that Dany and Tyrion, on their way back to Westeros, are going to maybe stop in Volantis and pay them some due punishment for some of the things that they've thrown at him. And then all of a sudden Tyrion is in Volantis and walks into this vault and sees, oh my God, here's Brightroar.
That would be so cool. Yeah, it does make some sense. I don't think it's that far-fetched. Obviously, there's not a lot of supporting evidence, but the concept is very fitting. I mean, you've got wealthy people screwing over other wealthy people. That fits, right? And
there is this idea that the Volantene could look at what's in Valyria as their own birthright to a certain extent. Like, that's ours. That's not for some people from these other, you know, from the West to come over and that's our stuff.
I would feel that way if I was Volantene.
You're totally right. Like, they have dubbed themselves the heirs of Valyria. They're like, we are the top guys now. So you're totally right. They would feel like it's theirs.
So, I mean, I like that theory. And again, that kind of would possibly give a little bit of, some weight to why Euron was able to, because he had slaves that are loyal to him.
Yes, I like that idea a lot because it's a theory that covers the most difficult part of this, which is how did all of them disappear? Like he had a whole fleet, like no sign of it. It checks off all the boxes because you could just say, well, they sent their fleet to look, but they lied, right? Like that explains it perfectly.
Yes.
They did find a sign of it, or they knew exactly where to go. That explains away all these difficulties. That didn't happen. All that stuff is a lie. That's why it's hard to swallow, because it didn't happen. So yeah, that I like that idea a lot, and it would be fun to see some of these things pop up in Volantis, and we do have a heavy amount of foreshadowing that Volantis is going down to Dany and probably to Tyrion. And Tyrion's the one who gave us all that foreshadowing by being there and talking to the right people. So that fits super well. Building on this idea, there's this old quote from the world of Ice and Fire. This is where we get a little mystical, where I think we need to wrap this up into here because it seems relevant, especially if we're talking about the heirs of Valyria and what the people of Volantis might be thinking with regards to certain ancient writings. Let's have the quote.
Yeah. The wealth of the Westerlands was matched in ancient times with the hunger of the freehold of Valyria for precious metals. Yet there seems no evidence that the Dragon Lords ever made contact with the Lords of Casterly or the Lords of the Rock, Casterly or Lannister. Septon Barth speculated on the matter, referring to a Valyrian text that has since been lost, suggesting that the freehold sorcerers foretold that the gold of the Casterly Rock would destroy them.
A very odd comment. The gold of Casterly Rock would destroy them. Now, we've seen that happen in a few ways. After all, the gold of Jaime finished off the Targaryens, sort of the Lannisters sort of finished off the Targaryens and have somewhat replaced them, with Robert in between. Also, the theory goes that the purchase of Brightroar directly led to something that led to the Doom of Valyria, something like the wealth of the Iron Bank that led to the Faceless Men, or a purchase like that, someone spend a lot of money to cause this to happen. There's a lot of different minor theories that all point to the same thing, that the origin of the Doom is somehow rooted in something that happened in Casterly Rock, some sort of payment, some sort of effort, some sort of power. And that would be a bit of a full circle thing, then, if the gold of Casterly Rock caused the Doom, and then these Lannisters died going there to where the Doom happened. And it's almost like Lord of the Rings, where you're going to Mordor to destroy the ring, but you didn't know you were going there to destroy the ring. You thought you were going to get treasures, but actually you lost them. Or we could...
No, 100%.
Yeah, right? We could call it a Lannister, Greyjoy, Valyria love triangle. They're all like, the Lannisters are trying to be Valyrians, the Valyrians are trying not to be Lannisters, but they can't help themselves. The money comes there anyway, and then Euron's trying to bring back all their treasures and recall all those Valyrian stuff. So,
and it does kind of explain, as much as the Valyrians seem to be into this idea of conquest, right? Like much of Essos was conquered by them. And there is some evidence that perhaps there was a battle on Battle Island in Old Town, right? But it does seem curious that they never expanded into Westeros, right?
Yeah.
And
or only slightly.
If you consider this theory, and if this was something that was widely known, or a theory that was maybe more pervasive at the time, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah. And just as an aside, George R. Martin himself has mentioned this theory. He even mentioned it was one of these, like, it's not his ideas. Like, people are saying that Aegon the Conqueror may have conquered Westeros in part because of this prophecy, and he was trying to, or a related prophecy, that it was necessary to have a united Westeros to face what was coming from the north. And that doesn't directly relate to this, but it is certainly relevant if we're talking about a Valyrian / Lannister prophecy that involves, a great doom of some kind. So certainly worth considering if those dots are connected.
For sure.
I'm curious, we have this quote, this prophecy that you guys are referring to right here. Is your interpretation of it that it's referring to modern times? The modern end of House Targaryen, because the Lannisters, the Gold of Casterly Rock, are what ended their dynasty and what could potentially still do it.
Probably not, but I think it's worth considering. I think it's
Okay.
more likely
That's a little besides the point, you know,
but it could be the end of like this was the last bit of Valyrian power in the world was the Targaryen.
Yeah.
So I lean more towards
it was the Lannisters that did that.
Yeah, it's hard not to notice that, right? So, but I do think it was more likely the Doom. But it's hard. You have to throw this one out there as an idea, and it's pretty valid as a possibility.
Well, and I think there's parallel, right? With in Fire and Blood, you have the Hard Hugh the Hammer, right? Yeah. And everyone thinks that that's the they mentioned the prophecy of the hammer bringing down the dragon, right? And everyone's like thinking like, oh, they're talking about that just happened. And it's like, no, obviously as a reader, we have the foresight to look into the future, like 150 years. So we know they're talking about Robert, but I like that idea. I hadn't considered it, but I really, really enjoyed that.
So, question here from Julie A, or more of a comment. I wonder if Gerion's search for Brightroar was a red herring. Maybe he gave that as an excuse to just leave town with Tywin's approval. It's certainly possible. Yeah, maybe he just sailed even farther. He just kept going. He's like, I'm going to Ashai. I'm just going to keep on going. Get the hell out of here. Yeah, it's interesting. Any kind of excuse to get away from Tywin. I wonder about that. It's interesting. Certainly, we know he wasn't going to make a name for himself there. So, whether he needed to make up an excuse, he definitely needed to get out of there, it seems like.
Well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head at the beginning of this episode when you talk about this is George at his gardening best, right? Like he's gardening, this is, I think the awesome part about these Valyrian steel swords is, this is, I think I have this later in the notes, but peak Martin gardening, right? And peak is spelled Peake, but this is the most beautiful kind of example of the gardening system by George, right? He mentioned all these swords, right? They all get lost, and you can bring them all back later, or they could have all these significances.
Yeah, he brings back like 5 of them, and he's like, "Well, there were 227 named. 5 is nothing." So, like, he just gave himself so much room, right? He could have a whole like squad of guys that are like you're forming like units of infantry. You want to make sure there's a couple of Valyrian steel blades in each unit, to make sure they have
Yes.
Or you have a front line of just the Valyrian steel guys. This is starting to turn into high fantasy, but I like it, facing down the others or something.
Totally. You get this game of musical chairs with like the most badass warriors and these different swords that are floating around. It could be really, really fun, and I think it's an opportunity the show really missed out on.
Yeah, they really did not. It seems like cool swords would have been fun to have, but they just were like, nah.
It really would have. It was good for them to make money too if they had done it. They would have sold so much more merch.
Because there is a lot of merch. I guess they're just like, we've already got so much merch.
Yeah.
And they were set up for it too. You have Sam stealing Heartsbane. You have Longclaw going from potentially going from Jon to Jorah, what could have been cool. Like they show Dawn for a second, in the Tower of Joy scene. There's all this stuff. There's a sword in Bloodraven's cave that could be Dark Sister, as they're running out, all this stuff that they just really could have built up on.
Yep.
They just said, like much of the end. They just shit the bed.
All right, let's talk about another sword. We've got Orphan Maker up next. This sword was wielded by Lawrence, maybe by Lawrence Roxton. We're not sure, but it was definitely wielded by John Roxton, aka Bold John Roxton. And you noticed maybe a little bit of an Easter egg in that, huh?
I did. I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, which took me down to Arthur Conan Doyle kind of a rabbit hole. Yeah. And there is a professor in the Professor Challenger series. There is a Lord John Roxton who I think is potentially, George likes to do this, give his homages to some of his favorite authors, some of his favorite characters from books. Very much think that this is one of those instances.
Right on. Well, but his ancestor Lawrence Roxton, who I mentioned first, we're not sure if he had the sword, but Bold John Roxton definitely did. So the question is whether this sword has come into their house in the interim or whether they've had it for a long time. That's just an open question at this point. One thing I love about House Roxton is that they are their house is the Ring. They are so they are Lord of the Ring. George having a little fun there. And of course, we've already mentioned Lord of the Rings once. I wonder how many more times it'll come up. Probably at least once more. It is George R. R. Martin, after all, heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings. Pay homage
for sure, and
to where it came from.
And my love of fantasy swords started with, Tolkien.
Yeah.
I remember being a little kid watching The Hobbit and the sword sting. Just being like, that was my kind of interest. I was like, whoa! As a little kid, like they name swords that I don't know why that seemed so cool to me as a kid, but it never left me. When I started reading the series for the first time, I was, oh yes, they have swords that are named. Yes, I was like really into it. So yeah, 100%.
And this is a nice segue from something we were just discussing. You brought up Hard Hugh Hammer and how he thought the prophecy said he would bring down the dragon. Well, Bold John kills Hugh Hammer before he can, overthrow too many dragons, and thus dies ignominiously. And then Bold John himself is killed a minute later. Supposedly he slipped on Hugh's guts, which kind of an odd detail, but hey, maybe that's what happened. We don't know whether the sword has ever gone back to House Roxton, but we do know that it shows up with Unwin Peak. So Unwin Peak, boy, what a character. We're going to spend a lot of time on him when we get to Fire and Blood. Certainly can't cover him today. It's not direct. It's most of what has to do with him isn't directly related to this, but he is certainly an example of the opposite of what we were saying before about the gentleman's agreement and giving back swords to certain houses. So this guy, not the only thing he sort of unwritten rule he broke, huh?
No, this guy is an unbelievable. Fire and Blood, my two big takeaways from Fire and Blood when I first read it were Unwin Peak, what a dickhole, and Sanduck the Shadow, how badass. We're gonna talk about him later, but this was one of my big takeaways from Fire and Blood was just how awful of a guy this was. Now, as I started rereading for this episode, I had a little bit more sympathy for the guy, when you just look down. We're talking about Father's Day. Just remove all of the things this guy did as a hand or a politician, and just look at his life as a dad. It was tough.
Yeah,
it
really was.
The guy, his first son dies during infancy. His eldest daughter dies at 12, giving birth. He has two daughters by his second wife. They both die during infancy. His second son dies while being fostered at the Red Wines in a sailing accident. And it's like, and then his other son is knighted by, is that correct? No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of someone else. Okay. But yeah, no, I mean, he's also responsible for some very horrible things too. So it's hard to feel too bad for him, but this is again, George R. R. Martin creating these characters who on one side seem, again, he creates these black and white characters, but if you dig a little deeper, they're a little more gray than you may think. There's a little trauma here. As a dad, I mean, it's hard not to feel for him a little bit, even though he's maybe one of the biggest jerks in the whole series.
It reminds me of Cersei. This is very, very similar to how we think Cersei deserves all sorts of judgment for all sorts of things, but the death for children, not that. That is not justice. That is not right. Those are individual lives. Also, one person doesn't, it's not justice for one other person to die because of someone else's crimes, right? Like Unwin Peak's kids weren't evil. It was him, right? So that is not that. Yeah, there's no chance of calling that justice. So that's a really good point. You're right there. George is extremely good at giving us sympathy for the devil. In this case, would be a good way to put it. Perhaps
one thing I just thought of, just thinking of something you said, the strangeness of John Roxton slipping on Hugh the Hammer's guts.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's supposed to be a parallel to Robert and the boar ripping out his guts.
Okay, yeah.
Because there's already a parallel between the two characters. Just something I just thought of.
That's a very good point. You're totally right. That is, they do die very similarly. And
and I was right. So after the Battle of the Honeywine, Bold John Roxton knights Unwin Peak's son.
Oh, yeah.
And then his son dies like 6 days later. So that could be also a connection to how Unwin Peak ends up with his sword.
Yeah.
It seems like perhaps his son and Bold John Roxton were close. It seemed the Honeywine, I believe, happens after or before Tumbleton. So his son was dead by the time John Roxton dies. So it's not like his son gave it to him, but still there could be, there seems to be some familiarity and some closeness there. So
yeah. So we're not sure where the sword is now. Now it's probably not like fully lost. It's just not accounted for in the story. It's hard. It's probably not just gone altogether because none of the places that it's been seem like the kind of thing that it wouldn't come back from. It just was taken from one person to another. There's been some battles and such, but there's no reason for us to think it was like lost in the sea or something like that. It could be, but we don't have any evidence for that. Where we think it might be, at least we can trace down where it was. So Unwin Peak had it, but after the Peaks had all sorts of setbacks after this time, not just the Blackfyre rebellions, but mostly the Blackfyre rebellions. We could really chalk most of it up to that. So the continuing support of the Blackfyres brought the Peaks from one of the top houses in all of Westeros to just a sort of forgotten house. And we could maybe assume that the sword was taken from them then, since they didn't really have a right to it, given the attitude of ownership of these blades that we've expressed here. It didn't really seem like they had a claim to it. And that would be certainly something that would get brought up. Someone, when they're beaten and broken and everyone's crawling over, picking through what they have left, the chance to recover that sword from when they're at their weak point would be seems very rational to expect the House Roxton or someone to say, hey y'all, that's our sword. Now's our chance to get it back. So I feel like there's a good chance House Roxton still has it, but we have not really seen much or any of House Roxton during the main series to this point. But perhaps that'll change.
And I disagree with you. I think that it's probably still with House Peak.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it got back to Roxton. We had, Unwin Peak kind of unceremoniously leaves King's Landing. He kind of puts his resignation in as a bluff. Yeah. And the other counselors are like, fine. See you, dude. Yeah. Yep.
Good
bye-bye. And so he goes, and at that point he has Orphan Maker. So the idea is even though he leaves behind Tesserio and his fingers, right? Mm-hmm. He's probably not leaving Orphan Maker, right? Yeah. That's probably the one thing he takes with him back, back to Starpike. So then the next real, we hear about Armory Peak, right? Mm-hmm. Who's killed by Sandok. We'll talk about that later. Probably odds are he doesn't bequeath it to him, so he probably takes it back with him. And then the next real peak we hear about is Gorman Peak. And so again, this is where there's a Mervyn Flowers, I believe is his name. Yep, Mervyn Flowers, who's in the Kingsguard, and he is a bastard relative to Unwin Peak. And Mervyn Peak is a famous author. So that again, we're talking about. He's known for the Gorman Gas series.
Gorman Gas, nice Gorman Peak.
Exactly. So we have Lord Gorman. And just really quickly, the reason I think it's with the Peaks is this is just more headcanon for me. In the Blackfyre Rebellion, Gorman Peak sides with Daemon Blackfyre, as you've kind of alluded to. Yeah. They also, so right off the bat, you have Blackfyre and now you have Orphan Maker side by side, right? There's also some, I guess if you go down and you kind of do the math, the idea that Red Rain, I think most of us believe, belonged at one point to the Rain family, right? Before the Drums took it from them. So I think there is this idea that, Gorman is referred to as one of the finest knights in the realm of that time. Daemon Blackfyre is referred to as one of the finest knights at the time. And then, is it Rob Rain?
Rob Rain. There's a Rob Rain.
Yeah, Rob Rain. And then Rob Rain. And so you have these three of the best knights who have 3 Valyrian steel swords. We're talking about the Long Night and this idea of having awesome, warriors kind of get assigned these swords. It's just kind of this badass imagery. Headcanon, the Blackfyre Rebellion, you have just these really badass dudes with Valyrian steel swords, and it's like, oh man.
It's funny that you brought this up about Red Rain, because I only remembered to add it last minute to the documents, so you wouldn't have seen. But I asked George at a convention one time about Red Rain, about whether Red Rain was taken from House Rain, and he said many people kill someone and don't return their Valyrian steel sword. And so it just wasn't a conclusive answer, but basically he said that, not everyone returns a Valyrian steel sword. It was unclear. I still choose to believe that Red Rain came from House Rain. It just makes good sense.
It does. Yes. It really does.
And if someone was not going to return something that they won after battle, wouldn't it be an Ironborn, right? Yes. Like the whole idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. They would not.
It's like you pay the iron price. We're not giving that shit back.
Yeah, they don't participate in the return program.
Yeah. So that does make a lot of sense thematically and schematically.
we actually have a quote. We want to see. We're curious if we'll see Orphan Maker again, and let's read this quote, and then we'll talk about our odds of seeing it again.
Okay, let me get that. All right, yeah, here. It's the one that starts with the arrival of Prince Darren. Yeah. The arrival of Prince Darren and his dragon reversed the tide of the battle. Now it was Lord Ormond's men attacking, screaming curses at their foes, whilst the Queen's men fled. By day's end, Lord Rowan was retreating with the remnants of his hosts. Tom Flowers lay dead and burned amongst the reeds. The two Allens had been taken captive. Lord Costane was dying from a wound given him by bold John Roxton's black blade, the Orphan Maker. As wolves and ravens fed upon the bodies of the slain, Ormond Hightower feasted Prince Darren on oryx and strong wine and dubbed him a knight with the storied Valyrian longsword Vigilance.
Oh, yeah. Now, so will we see it again? We mentioned you got another theory here. Maybe there is, maybe it's in the Golden Company. There are peaks in the Golden Company, and whether or not it is, I wonder if there's any Valyrian steel in the Golden Company at all. It seems like there's a decent chance there is, even if it's not this particular sword. I mean,
yeah,
they carry their wealth on their person. They've been successful for a long time. Some of them may have fled Westeros with their family blades. After all, these are the descendants of powerful Westerosi houses, so they could have nothing stopping them from running away with their sword, like a Sam Tarly or something like that.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, Aziz. Just assuming that one of the peaks who fled after the peak uprising has the sword, and the Golden Company lands with Aegon. Do you see because George loves his historical parallels? Can you, I guess, imagine or think of a scenario where there's like a Hugh Hammerish type scene where a peak, murders someone, of that kind of ilk,
like history repeating itself sort of scenario?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, there's who currently fights with a hammer or a large bludgeony weapon like that. I can't think of someone besides Robert off the top of my head. There's got to be a few, but nothing's coming to mind. I can think of a few people to fight with flail and spike, mason chain, things like that. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought was more so less preoccupied with the idea of someone with a hammer, but just kind of like a dragon seed type person who all of a sudden, and here was my thought again, total tinfoil, put it on. It's not very well thought out or hashed out. But if Aegon comes over and ends up with one of Dany's dragons and something happens to Aegon, right? One of the ideas is Brown Ben Plum might be the person who helps facilitate that dragon coming over, or the dragons like him. What if he has Aegon's gone, there's a power vacuum, Brown Ben ends up on a dragon riding it, and then all of a sudden the peaks just gut Brown Ben.
That certainly would be history repeating itself, that's for sure.
Yes, with Orphan Maker, right?
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of, but other than that, I was struggling to come up with a cool way to make this sword come back into the story and just thematically be fitting, and also not just be too kind of over the top.
If George was really trying to lean into it, it would literally make or an orphan when it was used. He would kill someone with a bunch, maybe kill Walder Frey or something.
1,000%. Well, and I thought about that. Like, I mean, this was again one of my thoughts, but it's just too crazy. Dany, what if it was
children?
Because, and then all of a sudden her dragons are her children, right? That would be the only other thought I had, but I just don't. I mean, I don't know. I think that John probably ends up being the one, if she's going to be killed, probably kills her.
Yeah,
but I don't see him wielding Orphan Maker.
Yeah, probably not. He's already got a sword, and there's thoughts of giving him another one. So what is he going to have? 3 Valyrian steel blades? What's that? Well, right. It would be nice to move on to the sword Vigilance, but I want to talk about Lamentation first and then Vigilance. So we'll talk about Lamentation. This is another one that has a chance to come back. It's certainly a house that you would expect to have a lot of power, or does have a lot of power, traditionally has held a lot of power. The fact that they don't have their Valyrian steel blade anymore probably irks them somewhat. These old houses, they care about their standing and their stature, and this lack is probably bothers them a bit. The last time we saw Lamentation, it was in the hands of William Royce during the Ride of the Seven, a very famous incident during the Dance of the Dragons. It was when they tried to save Prince Joffrey. Remember, Joffrey jumped on his mom's dragon, and that didn't go very well, and that puts it mildly. And Joffrey, of course, dies, and these 7 men that try to rescue him are not successful, and of course he's dead before they even get there. And Royce himself, along with 2 of the others, Glendon Good, who is the commander of the Lord Commander for less than a day, and then Giles Ironwood, who was somebody in the Kingsguard, and those 3 die. And the sword, well, the story goes, a man jumped down off a roof and landed on Sir William from behind, and he fell, and the sword just, boom, it's gone. But there's some tales that might indicate it was picked up and used shortly after. 2 examples we have here. One of which is that a man named Sir Warwick Wheaton, I guess he's ancestor to Will Wheaton, and he used it to, it says that this guy slashed a wing off of one of the dragons in the dragon pit, one of the smaller dragons, but for Cyrax, in fact, and which I guess Cyrax is more of a medium-sized dragon, but whatever. And the bit says that it was probably Lamentation that did it, because it was a Valyrian steel blade, and there was not exactly a lot of them flying around. But there's another tale of the death of Cyrax that gives us sort of a metaphorical sounding sword that really sounds like Valyrian steel. So let's read this quote, and then we can sort of parse out these possibilities.
As others fled, the story went, the one-handed prophet stood fearless and alone against the ravening beast, calling on the 7 for succor, till the warrior himself took form, 30 feet tall. In his hand was a black blade made of smoke that turned to steel as he swung it, cleaving the head off Cyrax from her body.
That is pretty interesting the way it's described. I mean, a black blade made of smoke. Smoky black is how Valyrian steel is described. So it's a very, very distinct description. And it says it turned to steel as he swung it. So it really sounds like a reference to Valyrian steel, just a very poetic description. And since Lamentation is put in the hands of this Sir Warwick Wheaton person to kill Cyrax, and we have a different story about the stranger, or the shepherd rather, killing Cyrax, also with a sword that sounds like it's Valyrian steel, I think we're getting alternate versions of the same story, which is something we get a ton of from the Dance of the Dragons era. Multiple versions of the same account that disagree with each other, but have a lot in common. Bottom line, the sword is missing, though, right? So that's pretty straight up. Now, let's talk about how this might relate to the current story. There's a lot more potential here than with some of these other swords, and a lot, we probably have a more solid idea of how it could come back into the story. Backing up to Waymar Royce, killed in the Game of Thrones prologue. He was whited. We have his brother killed by Loras. Their other brother, Andar, has hardly been seen, but he's the eldest. He's the heir. And, you know, their father is Bronze Jan, who is, of course, the biggest opponent of Littlefinger, you know, much to our approbation. We're happy that he's against Littlefinger. We have approbation for Littlefinger. And this is a problem for him because Littlefinger's a tough enemy. He's not really the kind of guy that Jan Royce isn't a great politician. He's insightful, but he's not, we could maybe say he's not approaching the situation in a way that we would expect him to succeed. And but there's an idea here from our friends over at Radio Westeros that I think is a really strong idea. We've seen the power of Valyrian steel as an artifact within these families, just the way they treat it, the way they hold on to it, the way they just hold it in such high regard. So imagine this. The theory is from Radio Westeros that they brought the sword out of King's Landing. Littlefinger brought the sword out of King's Landing, smuggled it out in the tapestries, or not. One way or another, he brought it to the Vale secretly. And imagine that he gives it to Bronze Jan. Of all the things you could bribe him with, that might be the only thing that would actually turn him around. I mean, this is a guy that's diametrically opposed to Littlefinger, but if there's anything he could be bribed with, it could be this. This might work. Even this might not be enough, but boy, I think he would be tempted. I think he would be very tempted. What do you think about that? You think if you're Bronze Jan Royce, you hate Littlefinger, but you really want this sword back, and everyone around you is siding with Littlefinger anyway, do you take this as like this is my my way to, you know, get out from under my own pride, because he can't just back down. And it's like hard for him to back down, right?
Yeah, no, I think that, I loved this theory when it was floating around that it was Widow's Wail in the tapestries, right?
Yeah.
Because that was floating around for a little bit. I like it even more if it's Lamentation, because it just seems more fitting to me. It seems to, as you said, we've already seen the immense value that these swords carry, not just from a monetary standpoint, but just as an ancestral heirloom. So yeah, and I can't see any situation where Bronzione is actually won over by Littlefinger outside of this.
Yeah.
There's just, I can't see anything that would kind of have him turn the tides, and this being perhaps the one thing, as far as if Littlefinger were able to do this, as far just to kind of show a sign of goodwill or good faith.
And it wouldn't have to be like, you're my friend now, right? It could just be like, you won't come after me now. It doesn't have to be like, you're on my side.
How bad
just
can I
back
be?
down. Yeah, just
yeah. Like Bronze, you understand how much I could make on the open market with this sword, but instead here I am returning it to you to its rightful familial place. You and your sons will be able to have it. Which the house words are we remember, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, you remember this sword, right, Bronze? Yeah, you remember? Okay, here it is, yeah, and I do think there's something kind of funny that, here's a family that embraces Valyrian steel, but also still wears bronze armor, and I understand the rune is kind of like a little bit of a hypocritical thing.
There, yeah.
Juxtaposition. Yeah, it's like, okay, you got the most modern technology and also one of the most like rudimentary technologies going for you.
You get the lightest, efficient sword and this heavy, ridiculous breastplate.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, I really like that idea. Now, the idea of, again, history being cyclical, repeating itself. Will we see, Lamentation go into battle against a dragon? That I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Aziz?
That's pretty hard to see. There can only be so many people fighting dragons, right? There's only 3 of them,
right?
And they should mostly be 2 of them will be on the same side, I guess. Yeah, so it seems kind of unlikely, but it would be really cool if it happened. We'll definitely see it coming if it starts to happen. You'd be like, oh, he's holding Lamentation. Oh my goodness, there's a dragon. Wait up, what's happening? Another thing about the bribery aspect too here is that Littlefinger doesn't just Bronzione will be put in a position where he pretty much has to accept, because what's he going to say? He's like, if you don't accept, well, I'll just have to give it to Nestor.
Right, and he's
got to give it to some
option.
Royce, right? Yeah. It would be such a shame if it wasn't in the hands of a Royce, right? Like, he could say it that way, like, oh, man.
Yeah. We've already given him the gates of the moon. You don't want us to give him the sword, too.
Yeah, what happens if you're just, like, these guys would be more, this Royce branch would be more powerful than you. You can't have that, can you?
You just got some armor with some funny symbols on it. That's all.
I'm just asking questions here, right? Yeah.
For sure.
This is really good. Now, considering another angle here, by the same token, someone else could win Royce's favor by saying, look, we like that you're opposing Littlefinger. Let's have you go farther with that and give you the ability to do it more thoroughly. And that could be Varys helping support his young candidate. If Aegon needs allies, which he does, why not reach out to Bronzione Royce, who clearly doesn't like Littlefinger? He seems like a natural person to maybe bring onto their side. And this could be the same way to do that. Of course, in this case, you don't necessarily need to give Jon Royce anything to go against Littlefinger. But if you want to really bring him onto your side, if you have this sword, you have a leg up on everyone. So these are the 2 main people I could see really making use of that. Would you have thoughts on Varys here or any other candidates?
I think there's a third candidate that we're not considering, right? And that's the Citadel.
Yeah, okay.
I just think it's very suspicious that we have the Dance of the Dragons, which essentially results in, the end of dragons, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, as we're losing a bunch of dragons, we're losing Valyrian steel. Those are disappearing at the same time. This time period between 129 and 133 or whatever, that's where we see a lot, whether it's Lamentation or Orphan Maker, there's a bunch of these swords that are going lost in that time period. And I don't think it's a coincidence that dragons are disappearing, and then also Valyrian Steel is. And if you subscribe to the idea that the Citadel is behind the killing off of the dragons, then why not subscribe to the idea that they're also behind the collection of these Valyrian Steel swords that could be of value for something? We know how valuable they are, but perhaps the Citadel knows of another value that we're not thinking of.
Very good point, and that is an excellent segue to our next sword, which is Vigilance, the ancestral blade of House Hightower, last seen used by Ormond Hightower during the dance. He also knighted Prince Daeron the Daring after the Battle of Honeywine with it, after which we did quote earlier. That's the battle where the two Allens were captured, and the tide turned because of the arrival of Prince Daeron. And that is what got him knighted. I almost said noited.
Noited.
He got noited.
Avoid the noid, people. Yeah. Dominoes.
And now Ormond was slain in a epic moment that we've got quoted here that I don't know about y'all, but this is going to be a few years away. But we're probably going to see this on TV, and it's going to be something.
Yeah, we love some Roddy the Room.
Oh, yeah.
As singers tell it, Lord Roderick was bloody from head to heel as he came on, with splintered shield and cracked helm, yet so drunk with battle that he did not even seem to feel his wounds. Sir Brynden Hightower, Lord Ormond's cousin, put himself between the Northmen and its liege, taking off the ruined shield arm at the shoulder with one terrible blow of his long axe. Yet the savage Lord of Barrowtown fought on, slaying both Sir Brynden and Lord Ormond before he died.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, that is probably a little exaggeration there, like they always do, but still, damn.
Yes.
Yeah, that's gonna be something to see. That whole battle is crazy because it's like right after that you have the second battle of the Tumbleton gets destroyed, and yeah, that's gonna be really something to see brought to screen. But we're getting off topic. A Song of Ice and Fire connections here. Leighton Hightower, he's the current Lord of Hightower. Probably still has it. There's not a lot of reason to think that Roddy the Ruin's men claimed the sword. After all, it was a suicide charge, and his men were badly outnumbered. So it seems like they probably kept their sword there. He probably didn't lose it because it's not like the whole army was destroyed. It was just Lord Ormond himself. It was like, I'm going to go for the leader and cut through all these other guys, but there's still a lot of other guys there, right? The army wasn't annihilated. So they probably kept the sword. Old Town is so powerful. They've got their ways and means to get their sword back, more so than a lot of these other houses that we've talked about, even more so than the Peaks, certainly more than the Roxtons or the Casterleys. I'm not the Casterleys, but the Rains. I meant to say Castamere, the house that runs Castamere or did. So now we have a quite decent possibility to see this sword show up again, right? With House Hightower having it, we've got action coming to Old Town via Euron. We've got a POV there, and Sam seems pretty likely. But before I turn it over to you, here's a nice note from Nina who says, it may be the case that Vigilance was introduced in The Princess and the Queen specifically to set up the Hightowers having a Valyrian steel blade in preparation for the Winds of Winter. The work that became The Princess and the Queen definitely began after A Feast for Crows, meaning Nina says George started writing Princess and the Queen after A Feast for Crows was published. And when George had already bumped up Hightower emphasis in giving them their own end-of-book subsection. So it basically is what we're saying. George is going back to do some gardening for this. This is something we've been kind of talking off and on through this whole episode. Nina agrees it's not very likely to have gone elsewhere. So having it right there, do you what do you think about this? What do you think about Vigilance? What do you think about how it might play out with what's happening at Old Town coming up in the plot line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I put it in the notes. I keep waffling back and forth whether it's appropriate or ironic that the blade Vigilance is going to be with someone who's been locked in a tower for 10 years studying spells. It's, is he being vigilant, or is he kind of ignoring the important things Varys knows in the book? I like to think that it's more vigilance, right? Like, he's onto something, he knows something, he's clearly going down this rabbit hole. We've all been kind of probably down a similar experience within A Song of Ice and Fire. We think we're on something. We're on Search of Ice and Fire. We're going to Westeros.org. We're on Reddit. We think we've put together this huge, great idea. We're connecting dots that no one else has. I do think that like you said, Euron's on his way. That puts, I've long thought that Euron wields a Valyrian steel blade to go with that armor.
Yeah, right, yes.
Yep. He doesn't have one yet. So Vigilance, I don't know. I don't like the idea necessarily of that. I mean, I kind of like the idea of the High Towers having one. And then, at some point, maybe it's Baelor, Bright Smile that has it, or it comes into someone else's, possession. But the thing that I love about this, about Vigilance, is just this idea. So we have, Roddy the Ruin facing off against Ormond Hightower. And then, 80 years later, we have, the Gerald, the White Bull, at the Tower of Joy facing off against another Dustin of Baraton.
That's
So,
true. That's true.
if you believe that, and again, this is just more tinfoil, there's no reason to believe that Gerald was wielding, a Vigilance. I think if he was, we would probably know about that. There'd probably be note. But I think I've heard you, talk about the Spider-Man meme before in these episodes where everyone's pointing. But it's kind of like, if the Dustins had it, then perhaps he has it there, and then, or if the Hightowers have it, perhaps Gerald has it, and you have this situation where they're like, oh yeah, oh no, yep, that's our sword. Or a situation where they're both dead, and then Ned's like, well, who do we return this to?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we give it to the Hightowers? Do we give it to the Dustins? I'll tell you what, you guys figure this out. I'm gonna go bring Dawn back to Ashar. So yeah, I think, to me, again, my best bet with a lot of this is Occam's razor type stuff. It's probably still with the Hightowers.
Yeah. It's worth considering the other possibilities. It's fun considering the other possibilities, but this one really does seem like it's perhaps not actually lost, though it might be. And it is, if it's going to be seen, it'll probably be pretty early in the Winds of Winter, at least by the midpoint that it happens. If we haven't seen it by then maybe we're not going to.
Yep.
So let's see. Sticking with the area, Old Town and the High Tower. Let's not forget the Citadel. Like you said, keeping the Maesters in mind. They already have some Valyrian steel that we know of for sure, and they have Valyrian steel links. Every once in a while, a Maester forges a Valyrian steel link. Archmaester Yogi asks, what happens to a chain when a Maester dies? We assume the lords and ladies of Westeros aren't so petty as to keep a Maester's chain. They would send it back to the Citadel. So... But they might steal the Valyrian steel link if there was one there. I don't know. They might do that. But you got to figure.
After a whole many generations, a family just kept keeping the Valyrian steel link every time until they had enough.
And that's the thing. It would take a really long time to do that because we can't take Lewin completely literally, but he says 1 in 100 Maesters forge a Valyrian steel link. Maybe it's not really 1 in 100, but maybe it's less. But at that rate, even if there's 1,000 Maesters in Westeros, and that might be high, and even if it's not, it probably can't be much more than that. There'd only be 10 Valyrian steel links at that ratio, right? So that's a really small number. And maybe they were more common in older times. I would guess they were, but that doesn't mean they were ever like common. And a question for another time, one we can't answer, but it's worth asking. What did they forge links of at the Citadel prior to the existence of Valyrian steel? The Citadel predates Valyria. So what did they forge there? What was the link for the mysteries back then? It might not, it would have had to be something else. So, yeah.
Dragon steel.
Yeah, they would have called, by the old name, right? Dragon steel. Yeah. They had the recipe back then. They're the Citadel. They knew.
Exactly.
So basically the point is that even if you collect all the Valyrian steel links from all the Maesters, you probably don't even have much more than a dagger's worth or something like that. It probably isn't very much. Although I wonder if there's a rod, ring, and mask. Every Archmaester, there's a rod, ring, and mask they wear that corresponds to the metal for that discipline. The silver one is for healing, and so the Archmaester in charge of healing has a rod, ring, and mask of silver. I wonder if there actually is a rod, ring, and mask of Valyrian steel, because that seems like a lot of Valyrian steel. Maybe it's just like a little bit, like there's a little bit on the mask, but it's mostly made out of something else. It's just like, how you can get silver plated something when it's like gold plated. It's not really silver. It's got a tiny bit of silver. Valyrian steel plated.
As we're talking about Valyrian steel rods, it reminds me of something. It does remind me of something I wanted to give you guys a little bit of grief on. Last week you had Nina on, and you guys were discussing the Asha fragment chapter.
Sure.
Ashea brings up the rubber spear. All right.
Yeah.
You guys are talking about a rubber spear, and there wasn't one dildo joke. That's why you need New Dad on the podcast, because I would have been making dildo jokes for the entirety of that episode.
Yeah, they really missed out there. I set them up so well.
You really did.
Damn. We failed.
Yeah, you guys really did. With your highbrow entertainment, you guys need someone to come and muck it up a little bit.
That's what
Uncle
I'm
Tickles
known
is here.
for. I know. Speaks very highbrow.
Hey, I'm just saying, Uncle Tickles will bring it. We'll bring it back to the gutter.
Well, you also made note of another item here that is worth mentioning. It's probably not lost, but it's cool, and we should at least mention it briefly, which is the Axe of House Celtigar. One of the reasons it's worth mentioning is it's a reminder that the Celtigars are from Valyria. They had stuff. They got to bring a little loot as well. They might have something besides this axe and that cool Kraken horn, which might be relevant as well. But you saw a theory related to this that it's maybe not super likely, but cool and definitely possible and worth mentioning. Take it away.
Yeah. And before we started going live, Ashea and I were talking about her first panels on at Con of Thrones.
Yeah.
And I made the connection that I was actually able to be part of this panel because Ashea has a distaste for early panels. So there was an opening that allowed me to kind of slip in. So I was part of this early Valyrians panel, and fellow Westorian and mod here at History of Westeros put forth a theory that I love. To me now it's headcanon. And, so they had this rumored Celtigar Valyrian steel axe. And we have throughout the series Tyrion becoming more and more, comfortable and familiar with wielding an axe. And there's this idea that Laura, and potentially someone before that, but the first place I had ever heard of it was Laura Brandes.
Shout out Laura, yeah.
Theorizing that perhaps Tyrion will wield this Valyrian steel axe. And to me, that got me so hyped just thinking about that. It's, for now, like I said, it'll forever be headcanon for me. If George doesn't do it, I'm just going to pretend like it happened.
Well, here's how I can imagine how it would happen. We can picture Dany going to Dragonstone, reclaiming Dragonstone. And then the Celtigars are just next door. They could be like, well, we need to pay homage to the new queen. We need to make sure she knows we're on her side. She's got actual dragons, so this is something else, right? Yeah. And maybe the axe is like an offering. I mean, that's a lot to offer, but still, it could happen.
Well, yeah, and I think there's also in the series, and one of you will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but when Stannis is kind of talking to all his bannermen, I felt like the Celtigars were kind of the line. They wanted to take it out on one of the realm or one of the areas of the Seven Kingdoms. Like they wanted to go someone who they considered to be a traitor, and they wanted to really just kill the women and children. And Davos was like, "What? Like, why would we do that?
Yeah.
Why would we go and that's crazy. Like, what do those women and children do?" So perhaps there's something along the lines of, because there's already seems to be setting up this animosity between Davos, this discrepancy between. So that's another possibility, right?
Sure,
like,
yeah.
If Davos becomes, someone that's close to Jon, and all this happens, and Tyrion and Dany and Jon, and they're all together, perhaps it comes that way too as well. But yeah, I think there are ways that this can happen organically without being too crazy or far-fetched. I just really hope to see it. I know that people fear Tyrion's going down a really dark path, and you guys have talked about that ad nauseum, but I'm one that hopes that maybe it's not as dark as we hope. Right
on. Yeah, we'll definitely see. I hope it does. I mean, when he mentioned that Kraken horn, we know there's Krakens coming. I have a hope that maybe the Kraken horn is sort of like the lead-in to this.
Yeah.
Like, if Euron is using Krakens, they might need to like do something like, well, we've got our own way to stop that. I don't know. That seems maybe a little far-fetched, but it's cool to think about, and it gives us another way for maybe some of this to develop, certainly. Miss Man Jones says the Citadel forged the magic link out of onion rings before Valyrian steel arrived in Westeros. Sad to see that tradition faded. Oh, yeah, very fragrant tradition.
It is actually an interesting question. Like, it's a funny comment, but what did they do? At what point did they add Valyrian steel links to the Citadel?
How long into it did they make that switch over? Yeah.
I don't know. As a chubby person, I would be bummed that they ceased the use of onion rings.
They are magical. I mean, it's true.
They're magical and delicious, and you can dip them in anything. You eat them alone.
Okay, let's take a quick mid-roll break here. We've covered roughly half of what we have planned on covering. The second half, arguably, is more interesting. We've got some of the more alluring topics like the Targaryen Valyrian Steel items, so stick with us for that. Let me get through a few excellent shout-outs for our excellent supporters. Show them some love because they show us some love, and that is how love is best handled, as a two-way street. Yes. All right, let me find these names. Our lovely friends over at the Blood Rider section of the patron experience. Koholkoi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a Dragonbone bow. Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the Wildfire Whip Gehenna. Screenwriter Catherine Van Pelt, wielder of a Valyrian Steel quill, slayer of unoriginal screenplays. We also would like to give a shout out to our loyal and trusting Ironborn captains. Why not mention them today since we've been talking about Euron a bit? Black Matos Stormrider is captain of the Rusted Hinge. Lord Chucklaws is captain of the Droma Nightblood, a destroyer of evil. John Gregor is captain of the Fist of the Drowned God. Sir Kiran of Lonely Light is Scourge of the Sunset Sea, captain of Naga's Breath, a droman armed with siphons of wildfire. Aileen is Archer Queen, captain of the Border Collie. Crimson Cade is captain of the Drowned Queen's Vengeance. Jasana the Just is the collector of tolls, captain of the Golden Gift. Beneath the Gold is a podcast focusing on lesser-known A Song of Ice and Fire characters. I highly recommend checking them out. Prakash, the Lord Protector of the Gallifreyans, is captain of the TARDIS of the Seven Seas. Tempest of House Brewer is captain of the Summer Storm. Catherine the Cruel is captain of the Kraken's Claw. And Lana Del Relay, Death Dreamer, is captain of the Cyclopean Call. Thank you for the support, folks. And I also want to shout out our very new t-shirts / stickers / similar related items you can get printed over at historyofwesteros.threadless.com. It's been a long time coming. We kind of put it off having shirts and stuff for a while, but we got around to it. It's there. Help yourself to our selection, and we'll be adding more ideas. We added the Good Said shirt recently, which is cool.
Good set, Aziz.
Good set. Yeah, I've got one. I ordered one of those. I haven't ordered. It should be showing up any day now.
Oh, excellent.
I think I bought 3 of the shirts. So yeah.
You know something else that was good said in our chat. We got a super chat that said your guest is so hot.
Oh my God! Yeah, I'm a very good looking guy. I'm sure that. Good set. Whoever that super chat's from. Good set.
Good said.
Good said.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Tommy. Okay, so let's talk about Targaryen Valyrian Steel. Let's turn to their items. They're much closer to the source of this magical mystery metal. 3 items of note in particular, all of which were lost before the start of the series, but we have reason to suspect all 3 of them will reappear. 2 of them might be together and could reappear at the same time. What's this note about shirt?
Tommy, he has a shirt to show off right here.
That's right.
And Michael Clarfeld's even in the chat.
Clarfeld. So, here we go. There we go. There's the shirt. Here we go. You guys see this chub bod?
Yeah, look at that. It's Aegon the Conqueror's crown and Blackfyre.
Whoa,
that's right. So I mentioned I wanted to do this as a panel. So one of the things that I did right off the bat was reach out to some of our more talented artists in the community. And Michael Clarfeld was the first person I reached out to. And I asked him if he could do something for Blackfyre and the Crown. And this was the result. It's a shirt I'm in love with. And if this ever does become a panel, which I hope it does at one of the Ice and Fire cons down the road, these shirts will be available for free for anyone who comes and checks out the panel.
I'm dying to get one. Incentive. It looks so cool. Ever since, it's been teased since last year. Yeah, very cool. So yeah, I'm confident that panel will happen next year. Ice and Fire Con 2022. I couldn't think of what year it was, but 2022.
That's right.
I need to back up slightly. I just realized I forgot to shout out our Queens of Love and Beauty. Let me take care of that. They deserve their shout out. From the depths.
Wait, did you think of Queens of Love and Beauty because you saw Tommy's full body and shirt right there?
Because my full body. They're very curvy. I'm very curvy. I am. Yeah.
You deserve
very much
the laurel.
Yeah. I'm like Bessie.
From the depths of Flea Bottom, Lord Ken of House Hammer has declared for Queen Carrie, Fire of the North, who recovered Dark Sister from beyond the wall, and Allura of Glory in the name of love to Bud of House Beresford, Knight of Tolkien, and Arbiter of Scotch from Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys, and Lady of Jameson. See, we knew we'd have Tolkien get mentioned again, even if it wasn't directly from George.
That's right.
Thanks, y'all. Very much appreciate the support. So yeah, let's talk about an item that is basically the entire reason we couldn't call this episode The Lost Valyrian Steel Blades or something like that. But hey, the title we settle on is actually shorter. We cut off the word blades. It's just The Lost Valyrian Steel. And that's fitting because Valyrian Steel cutting off part of something, even a name, that works. Aegon the Conqueror was crowned by Visenya, and we're not sure where the crown came from. It's got a very simple description: a circlet of Valyrian steel set with big square-cut rubies. So it's simultaneously extremely fancy because, I mean, Valyrian steel and huge rubies, but as far as crowns go, that's actually pretty understated. The bar for crowns and fanciness is extremely ridiculously high. Let's have a few real-world examples for the fun of it. This is the Imperial State Crown of England. The current one, mind you, not some older one, but the current one. Quote, the frame is made of gold, silver, and platinum and decorated with 2,868 diamonds, 273 pearls, 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds, and 5 rubies. You heard right. The damn thing has almost 3,000 diamonds in it, and the very fact that I'm rounding up diamonds, like I'm rounding up diamonds. That shows you where we're at, right? That's just the level we're operating at with absurdity of wealth. But the Imperial Russian crown, see, I put that one in the notes, and Nina was helping out, as she often does, goodqueenally.tumblr.com with 1L. Shout out. She's super great at this. She's like, oh, there's an even more fancy one. She posts she shares with me the Imperial Russian crown, which has 5,000 diamonds.
Okay. But how many rubies does it have?
That I don't know.
Okay, so, maybe it has only one ruby.
Yeah, some of the rubies in the Imperial, the England one, are like the ruby of Prince Edward, or the Black Prince, and the sapphire of St. George. Like some of these are they're like Valyrian steel swords. They have their own names, but they're part of a crown. They're not even individuals anymore. It's like, whoa. Imagine like if you took 5 Valyrian steel blades and attached them to like a stick, and
or to a chair.
Yeah, or a throne. Yeah, exactly.
Well, better question: if a crown has a ruby in it, are we sure that's not part of a glamour?
Oh, well, what if it has 5? It's like if it's an odd number, yes, but if it's an even number, they balance out.
We're safe. Fair enough.
So if real world comparisons don't work for you, or if they aren't enough for you, you want to stay more in world. The crown of Aegon IV is a good example of one that is also quite fancy. It's described as red gold, huge and heavy, each of its points a dragon head with gemstone eyes. Like, whoa. Despite the reputation of that guy, that's Aegon the Unworthy. So, about as bad as it gets. Many Targaryens wore that crown, though. Dany's father, Aerys II, he wore it. So did Aerys I, some 50 years earlier. And Daeron the Good, the actual son of Aegon the Unworthy, wore it. Maybe they were all feeling some dragon envy because this is after the dragons died, so they have a crown that just reminds everyone, I neglected to mention the fanciest crown of all, that worn by the Burger King. Facsimiles of which are given out to children all over the world. Yeah, you would know about that probably, right?
Oh, yeah. I love a good Burger King crown.
Now, big fancy crowns were not the norm for the Targaryens, actually. Aegon III had a simple, unadorned golden circlet. Baelor the Blessed out-simpled them all by taking a page from the Ironborn's driftwood crowns by taking a crown of flowers and vines. Very rustic, very simple. Before Aegon, though, surely the various kings and queens of the 7 kingdoms prior to the conquest had a pretty wide variety. We're talking about thousands of years worth of kings and queens and their various crowns. Some probably wore the crowns of their predecessors. Some had new ones made. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to recall someone else's era. You want to claim descent from a certain branch of the family, things like that. A lot of politics goes on in choice of crown. The crown of the Unworthy that we just described was the 6th crown made during the Targaryen reign. Only one more was made after it, and that was for Maekar, the grandson of Aegon the Unworthy. Daenerys has a new one, but technically she's not on the Iron Throne. So, and if she is crowned, she might use a different one, right? Who knows what crown she'll choose to be crowned with if she's crowned. Fun fact, no description of Robert's crown in the books at all. Joffrey has a new one made. His mother has a new one made for him, and it's gold crusted with black diamonds and rubies, which passes to Tommen and is both literally and metaphorically too big for him. Stannis and Renly both have crowns too, of course. Stannis is red gold with points shaped like flames. Selyse has a matching one. Cersei's had 2 different crowns because she's just like that. And Renly's was also very overtly Tyrell Baratheon. It was golden roses with a big jade stag's head. So the Tyrells were really bummed out that crown never got used in earnest, huh? Even though they still got to marry into the throne, they didn't get their cool crown. Others wore Aegon's crown after him, but no other Targaryen king has made a new crown of Valyrian steel. That is an important point. We just told you that there have been 7 different Targaryen crowns worn by kings on the Iron Throne, but only Aegon's is made of Valyrian steel. Minus the Baelor's Flower and Vines one. They were all gold, except for the Valyrian steel one. So it's a reminder not just of this neat item that could reappear and have some importance to the series, but it just shows us how rare this stuff is. Think about this, y'all. Marinate on this concept. The Targaryens were something like the 35th most powerful family in all of Valyria. We're told that there were 40 Dragonlord families, and they were near the bottom. So I'm putting them in the 35th to 40th range there, right? Still, that's staggering wealth, right? They're the 35th most powerful family in a ridiculously powerful freehold/empire thing. So when they moved to Westeros, they brought their dragons, their ships. They made money by selling their Valyrian lands, which were probably, talk about real estate prices. That's probably but also talk about timing. Best sell high real estate move of all time. Right?
Yeah, this is GameStop at its all time.
The doom of GameStop. The doom of AMC, the doom of Robin Hood. Yeah, all these things. Valyria set all those things up.
Yeah, that's right. It was the beginning.
Now, can you imagine those Dragonlord families, the ones that were even more powerful and wealthier than the Targaryens? Whoever the top family was, did they have things like Valyrian steel-lined dragon saddles? Or, just imagine, what's the fanciest things? Chat. Hit us with your ideas. What are the fanciest extravagances you could put Valyrian steel on? Dragon Lords, right?
Valyrian steel crotchless panties.
Valyrian steel that's dildo, apparently, if we're sticking on topic from
with the rod. Yeah. Yeah, we got the Valyrian steel rod. You could just double purpose it.
If I had a Valyrian steel hairbrush, would it just easily brush my hair?
Yeah, it was just super. Yeah. The Valyrian steel combs. Yeah, that would be the kind of beauty item for a fancy Valyrian princess or something.
Actually, that sounds really nice. You just put a Valyrian steel comb in your hair.
Hey, the men too. A lot of them have long hair. They need those combs too. Whips, right? The Dragonlords use whips for their dragons. Imagine having your whip tipped with Valyrian steel instead of some common, ordinary metal. Oh. Just imagine. Ugh, so low class with your gold or your regular steel. Any fancy thing you can think of was probably Valyrian steel. At least an option, like a tiara, clasp on the cloak, right?
That's right.
Remember that joke about the Valyrian steel razor, about the person that cut his head off, didn't realize it? Gotta include that one, right?
There's a couple here. Shara Seastar says cutlery cuts through steaks and the plates.
People are always stealing our cutlery after our parties.
And then where is this? Kulnitsky says chamber pots.
Chamber pots. Oh my god! Yeah, why not? You got a chamber pot of gold. Why not?
Yeah, I think that's the epitome of a Valyrian steel extravagance.
Fitting along with the cutlery, I was like, how about a toothpick? Valyrian steel toothpick for after the meal. You're like, yeah.
Yeah, but you're talking about how low the Targaryens were in this idea of dragon riding families.
Yeah.
Perhaps it does lend a little bit of credence to the idea that the Casterly Rock gold, resulted in the Doom of Valyria, right? Because if they were to buy a sword, perhaps, who would be the most motivated, right? Probably a lower family. They want to get rid of some of the families above them. They want to maybe jump from 35th to 4th or 5th or 1st.
Throws off the balance of power,
Right. And so perhaps, and I think it would be a funny, irony if it's the Targaryens who took the money from from the Lannisters, provide them with Brightroar. That sets into motion the Doom, which then leaves them to be essentially the last Dragon Riders. But then the Lannisters are the family that end their line. I think, or to a certain degree, there is a certain poetry to that. There is a certain poetry.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Yeah, and it's fitting too. If I like the idea just from it's a little more mundane, but it fits in the idea that someone got a big infusion of gold, someone in one of the more powerful families, and that enabled him to start some kind of civil war. Because we're told that one of the theories for why the Valyrian, why the 14 Flames went up all at once was the sorcerers that were holding it back, they lost control, and that might be because too many of them were killed. And some of them were killed by these internecine struggles between the powerful houses. So if they're doing
kind of like these jumpstart families, right?
So if they murder some of these sorcerers that are the source of some of their familial power, but also the source of keeping the whole place from blowing up, you can see how that could, cause a big problem, a Doom-sized problem,
for sure.
But so the Valyrians were pretty terrible. I mean, they were awful people. They were slavers. They were greedy. But maybe they could have left a few more of these treasures behind. Let's say that much. But maybe we're overshooting the mark on this notion of Valyrian steel trinkets. Maybe it really was rarer. Maybe the reason why we don't see things like that is because it really was that rare, which was the point I started off with when introducing the fact that the Targaryens only seem to have Blackfyre, Dark Sister, and this circlet, which it's a crown, but it's a very simple circle. Like we said, it doesn't actually have that much Valyrian steel in it, as far as we can tell. So maybe there's a few unnamed items. There's no toothpicks that we know of, but there's maybe some pieces of jewelry here and there with just very small amounts of Valyrian steel, like roughly the equivalent to the Maester's chain. Not enough to do anything with, but maybe not enough to be noteworthy. The dragon horn that Euron gave to Victarion has a little on it, for example. Certainly the Targaryens didn't have Valyrian steel armor. They wouldn't have left that behind. But Euron shows up to show us that it actually exists. And just like that, Euron has more Valyrian steel than Aegon and his sisters. There's definitely more metal in that suit of armor than there is in Blackfyre and Dark Sister. I would bet heavily on that.
1,000%.
Yeah, right? Like I did the math. Okay. This is a good thing to have delved into for getting a better handle on these numbers. A longsword is a real life longsword. It's only going to weigh about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. A great sword would be a little bit more, not a lot more. A suit of plate mail is going to be up to 50 pounds. Now, not all of that is metal, but most of it is. So you're talking 30 swords to equal a suit of plate mail. Now Euron doesn't have plate mail. It would look like scale mail, but still, let's say it's only half. Let's say it's only 10 times. Let's say you need 10 swords for that, even that. So yeah, that just goes to show how incredibly powerful and rare the stuff is. Aenar the Exile, Gaming the Glorious, Daenerys the Dreamer. Either they lost what they had, which why would they have? Or they never had it. It seems more likely to me. And it's just kind of stunning to think about the fact that Euron seems to have more than they did. Doesn't that kind of just hit you kind of hard when you think about it? Wow.
It is mind-blowing. I mean, and it also kind of helps resonate the Celt. We talked about the Celtigars, right?
Yeah.
They have the dragon horn and the axe. When we're talking about kind of the lower tier dragon families, and if Celtigars and the Valyrians were even dragon riders, which they weren't at the time, so yeah, these were hard to come by items, it seems like.
Yeah, and here's where we get into the repurposing of items in a little bit, because we have this example of Tabho Mott reforging Valyrian steel. He's a Qohorik. We mentioned the Qohorik in the opening quote. He didn't make new Valyrian steel, right? He melted down ice, which was large enough for 2 swords. Now, let's talk about the crown, because this is an idea. Where did this circlet come from? Is it an item that the Targaryens already had? Did they make it? Did they melt down some of their other? Did they melt down all their toothpicks and cutlery to make this circlet? And the reason I wonder about that is we've talked a lot, off and on, throughout the history of this podcast about the way noble society functions with the way they dress and how they put a lot of thought and meaning into it. You don't just walk around wearing crowns. right? That is a big deal. You are putting yourself above everybody else. That looks like you're crowning yourself. I mean, it is. We see people aren't allowed to dress above their station, and a crown that's the top station, right? So you can't just do that. Like, people are gonna be like, who does he think he is? So, I mean, the Valyrians didn't have kings, so you might think like it might really stand out if you're like some member of one of the 40 families and you're walking around with a crown on. That would look bad. A circlet isn't a crown necessarily. It could just be a form of dress. Maybe it was like you could get away with it if it didn't have points. Like, there might be like a line you could come up to, but as long as it didn't have certain features, it was okay. A good example I could think of is, a lot of you may have seen the show Rome. Julius Caesar was played by Ciarán Hinds, the same man who played Mance Rayder, so that's kind of a neat connection. There's a scene in which he's preparing for his triumph, which is this big, celebration where he marches through the streets as a conquering hero, victory. It's a big show, big parade, and it's also religious and has a lot of meaning to it. And he's fretting over what to wear in this scene. He's like, is this too purple? Is this toga too purple? Because purple is the color of Imperials, and Romans were very sensitive about kings. You can't be, this is the Republic, the Roman Republics. You can't be acting all Imperial when they're a Republic. And of course, Caesar was already looking like he was too powerful. And that's, they did, in fact, kill him for that reason. So full circle there, right?
Well, one of the other things that comes to mind is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade too, which is maybe not the same idea, but it's when he has to choose the chalice, right? It's like, oh, I could look at all these adorned chalices, or it's the simple wooden one of the time, right? There is maybe a Last Crusade element to this.
Well, also, I think it's functional, too, because one of the other things I wanted to bring up is whether or not he wears it into battle. Like, you cannot wear Aegon the Unworthy's 9-pound gaudy dragon crown into battle, I don't think. You're going to have a very sore neck after that, and it could just go flying. Like, you just lean your head one way, and all of a sudden your head just keeps going. Like, I got to... So, but a Valyrian Steel circlet, Valyrian Steel is very light. You could easily fix that to the helmet. I mean, he's already riding on the back of a Valyrian or whatever, so he already looks ridiculously fancy, but why not have the crown on there too? Because he wore that crown before the conquest was completed. They put that thing on, and then he went to go conquer. So he's like, here I am.
Smart move.
Yeah. So along with this concept of reforging, here's where we get to sort of a question. Could the crown be melted down, reforged into something else? It begs the question of any other things being melted down. For a crown to be melted down, though, it has to become unlost. This crown is lost. So let's talk about where this thing is, because it's pretty important. The history of the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. First, we have to get through who it passed through, which is a fun story. After Aegon's death, it passed to Aenys, but he didn't wear it. And fittingly, this really fits into our concept of being a warrior thing, because Aenys was not a warrior. He was more pious. He had a yellow gold one made that was jade and pearl and had the faces of the 7. I guess 6 of them, because, you don't do the stranger's face, but hey. Visenya repeated history a bit when she crowned her son Maegor king, usurping Aenys' children, as you recall, probably, and she did so with Aegon's crown. She crowned Maegor with that Valyrian Steel circlet. He probably wore it into battle also, right? Given his attitude, he rode the same dragon, so he would have been wielding the symbols of power of Aegon. He had the dragon, the sword, and the crown. That's fitting. Jaehaerys the Conciliator followed Maegor, but he wore the crown of Aenys rather than Aegon. Perhaps this is what I was saying before about choosing the crown of your particular family's branch. Aenys was his father, so he kind of, as to distinguish himself from Maegor. That worked out. Then the Dance of the Dragons breaks out. Aenys' crown finds its way to Rhaenyra, while Aegon II wore Aegon's crown, but of course he was badly wounded really early in the war. And who takes up the crown but Aemond One-Eye, our great parallel to Euron, fully parallel. So many parallels between Aemond and Euron. We've talked about that elsewhere. And so that really drives this point home. It brings us back full circle to our idea of Euron recapturing all these old symbols of Valyria. He's wearing the shark crown right now, but Do you any chance he turns up with a Valyrian steel crown of some kind? Like, how many crowns does this guy have?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I kind of like the idea that it's somewhere in Dorne.
Yeah, right?
You know, which I think you're going to get to later. But I do. I mean, that seems to me to be the idea that resonates and sits most comfortably with me.
I agree with that. It's kind of hard to imagine Dornish giving it to Euron, although I guess he could take it maybe somehow. That seems hard to imagine. That's a lot of things that have to happen for that to happen, but it could. Now, Aemond One Eye was killed over the God's Eye. His body sank. The crown may have been lost there, but recovered. Dark Sister was, so they would have come together then. Now, Aegon III wears his simple golden circlet. He doesn't wear the Aegon's crown. But during Aegon III's reign, he's Aegon the Dragonbane. The dragons all die out, but his son Daeron I calls himself a dragon, the young dragon, and he is perhaps the Targaryen most like Aegon, until maybe Dany, but we'll see. So he wears this crown, Daeron does, while conquering Dorne, and he's the last one to do so because, as you said, this is where the crown seems to disappear. One of the reasons Aegon is compared to Daeron, or Daeron's compared to Aegon, is this ambition for conquest. In particular, the one place his great-great-great-great-grandfather couldn't take, which was Dorne, right? Now, arguably, Daeron couldn't defeat them either. You could say he did, fair enough, but it didn't exactly last very long. They overthrew him pretty quickly as far as these things go. They didn't have any outside help, so they got sneaky. They assassinated a lot of the officials Daeron put in place to manage the conquest, and then they rose up again. He came back with his fresh army, put them down again, and they said, okay, we'll meet you at a peace parley. And then ambush. 3 knights of the King's Guard are killed. Aemon the Dragon Knight's taken captive. And all these Targaryen symbols of power are taken at once. Aemon, Stark sister, King Daeron himself had Blackfyre, and of course the crown. And he is killed. So, what a coup. All of their stuff.
Like, swoop it up. It's all mine.
Yeah, like, dang, that was quite a move. Dark Sister was returned, only to be lost again. We'll come back to that in a moment. Blackfyre, ditto on all counts. Returned, lost again, and we'll come back to it in a moment. The crown, as you said, never returned. We don't know where it is. So, disappearing in Dorne, does that suggest to you that maybe the most likely place for it to come back up will be with this new, maybe real Targaryen, this Aegon, young Griff?
100%. Yeah. I think, it's not a coincidence Arianne is going over to kind of parlay with Griff. I think that in the long term or the short term, we see some sort of alliance between those two. And yeah, I think 100% that the Dornish will then kind of come up with this crown for Aegon to, help solidify himself, help legitimize himself, along with what we're going to talk about next, I think, is Blackfyre.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing about the trappings of power that comes back. If Aegon is wielding Blackfyre, which we'll get to why he might be, because if he gets that, maybe he'll get the crown, maybe he'll get both. But even if he doesn't have Blackfyre, let's just say he has the crown, let's say he has the Rhaegar's name, which is a name that has a lot of respect and power behind it, and he has things like maybe Darkstar wielding Dawn at his side, which recalls Arthur Dayne's relationship with Rhaegar. Just so many things to remind people of Targaryen power while associating it with the good sides of Targaryen power rather than the King Aeryses and the Aegon the Unworthies of the world. So, yeah, really high-level politicking, very symbolic, and I think it's very important. So, I wonder, too, if they have it with Meraxes' bones. Like, where is this crown being hidden? But they gave the skull back, right? Meraxes' skull is it's a red keep, but why would they give all those bones? Bones are valuable. They got dragon bone. Yeah, they probably made some stuff out of that. Some sword hilts or, I don't know. What would you make out of dragon bone if you had a big stash of it? Are we going to go back? Is it going to be another dildo joke? Dragon boner?
Yes.
Is he there?
I'm back.
Yeah,
I'm
now
back. Sorry,
he was muted for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I was. I thought I missed a dildo joke. I just hurried back the minute I thought I heard it.
Yes, what would you do with dragon bone?
Yeah, what would you do with dragon bone if
you can see why he's like, wait, how did he not?
Yeah. No, you're talking about the actual artifact of a dragon bone?
No, yeah, like because we talked about Meraxes' bones. Like
Yeah.
she was shot down in Dorne. They returned Meraxes' skull, but there's no mention of the bones, and those are valuable. So you've got to figure some of those ended up in some Dornish sword hill, some Martell adornments.
Well, it's
here and
interesting
there.
because the cat's paw dagger is described as having a dragon bone hilt. Correct?
True, yeah.
We're going to talk about another sword later that has dragon bone hilt.
It does
when
really
we
seem
get
to
to
pop
Sand
up.
Duck.
It does seem to fit well with Valyrian steel, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also there's I mean, I don't know. There's just this whole with Dorne, pretty much up until this time. There's a lot of questions that, for me, are unanswered and very tantalizing.
Yeah,
and the toad, the yellow toad's letter to Aegon, that made him just completely stop the conquest, right? Like that's another thing. It's what did she have?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they have some stuff, that's just
Dorne's got some secrets.
really,
That's right.
yeah, they got some stuff that's wrapped up in mysteries, and then it's covered and wrapped in an enigma.
Yeah, Doran's given Arianne some of the insider information, but definitely not all of it, right?
Not all of it. So yeah, I mean, back to my point, I think that it's 1,000%, a chance that we see this crown pop up with Arianne and Fagon down the road. I think it's a lot less likely that we see it with Euron.
Yeah, I would agree with that, unless he takes it or something, which seems kind of unlikely.
Yes.
I don't. Euron versus Fagon isn't something that we've explored much as a possibility. It doesn't seem like it's that likely to happen, but it could. So maybe that is worth exploring, but not today. Yeah, let's talk about Blackfyre briefly. We did a full episode on Dark Sister, and one day we'll do that on Blackfyre as well, going into the history and all its wielders, that fun stuff. So we won't cover that part today because that is a lot. But we will talk about where it is now. It, of course, House Blackfyre derives its name and claim in part from the sword. In large part, their claim comes from the sword. Obviously, Aegon the Unworthy knighted Daemon Blackfyre when he was very young and gave him the sword, which was a bit of a scandal at the time. And we've explored that very thoroughly in our episodes on the Blackfyre rebellions. The last person to have it may have been Aegon Blackfyre or Bittersteel or Maelys the Monstrous. We don't know if he was wielding it when Barristan fought him. I would guess not, but quite possibly was. Surely it's not with House Targaryen now, or we would have seen it. Rhaegar didn't have it. Aerys didn't have it. None of these people did. So it doesn't seem very likely that they just forgot about it. It's like, oh, actually, it's right here. It's in a closet. Whoops. How about that? Yeah. But the young dragon, Daeron, that we just talked about, he was the last one to wield it. And that was over 100 years before the Blackfyre Rebellion. The last Targaryen to wield it, that is. So it's an ample reason to think they do not have it. For essentially the same reasons, our top and perhaps only choice for where the sword might turn up is, again, with Aegon as part of these symbols of power. And Varys and Illyrio, especially given that quote we read, are excellent candidates to possess it. What an impact it could have with regards to making him seem legitimate, right? This is a hugely powerful, like this sword that absolutely stands for the Targaryens. Like, people will recognize it for what it is. It would really do a lot to emphasize his heritage, but also really emphasize who we think he actually is, which is he is probably a Blackfyre. And that's just a great, just a genius move by George. It's like, this is the Targaryen symbol. Like, actually, that's the Blackfyre symbol. and you are
so beautiful.
Yeah. So one note about where there was a theory that it was actually Illyrio's statue that is holding the sword. Now, I don't think so. The sword is described as silvery, like a regular sword, and Blackfyre is very dark. So I don't think that could be it. But that doesn't mean I don't think Illyrio could have it. Here's a quote that we find very important and you all may not be aware of, because this is a quote from A Dance with Dragons, but it's a quote from A Dance with Dragons before A Dance with Dragons was changed. This was a sample chapter read in November 2005 that was not the final version. This part was taken out and changed for the final version of A Dance with Dragons, but it gives us a clue related to this. Please read this quote.
Got you. Haldon says, Griff believes there is need for haste. Haldon eyes Tyrion and then begins to speak in another language. Tyrion cannot tell what it is, but thinks it might be Valentine. He catches a few words that come close to High Valyrian. The words he catches are queen, dragon, and sword.
Sword. Sword, you say? What sword could that be? Like, I just don't have any other ideas. Like, what other
No.
sword is there? That, right? So that is, yes.
Yeah, that's why this is probably one of the least compelling. I mean, it's interesting, but it's also one of the ones where I feel most certain.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
You know, like I'm with you. Like, what other sword could this be? What other reason could George have for omitting this line? Right? If it's not Blackfyre. Yeah, so I just think that it's just kind of an again, headcanon, unwritten conclusion that Fagan ends up with this. Now, the question I have for you, though, is I don't think anyone here is of the mindset that Fagon's here for the long game, right?
Mhm.
So if Fagon is not going to be, on the Iron Throne for long, who ends up wielding Blackfyre? Is it Jon?
Right. Yeah, good question.
Which to me makes the most sense, and because then that helps get Longclaw into Jorah's hands, right? Like, it helps kind of move the swords where you need them to be, in my mind.
It could, yeah,
But-
because Dany's not wielding
Yeah, but what are your
herself. That's a
thoughts?
big old sword. She doesn't wield swords, so
Right.
she would like designate a champion or give it to her nephew.
This is the sword that Euron's gonna get.
You're just gonna come take this one too.
Yeah, I'll just take that one too. Also, very fitting, right? If he has all the trappings of and all those symbols of Valyrian strength, then why not that one?
Yeah.
Could very much be. Although I will say, just for the I don't have a lot of textual evidence, but just based on the fact that I believe Euron ends up with a Valyrian steel sword. He is on a boat called the Silence, and he is a character who we believe will potentially help usher in the Long Night. The idea of him wielding Nightfall seems very poetic to me.
That is true. It would be, that is of course currently in the hands of the knight, the knight, Harris Harlaw, of odd name for an Ironborn, but he is a knight, and there's not many of those amongst the Ironborn, so it's kind of fitting. So yeah, you wonder now. There is good reason to think that Harris Harlaw is doomed, because Euron basically screwed the four Lords of the Shields the new Lords of the Shields that he appointed, because he expects them to be bait. And one of those four is Sir Harris Harlaw. Now, how the sword goes from being taken from Harris Harlaw by someone in the Reach and then back to Euron is kind of hard to figure, but it could happen for sure. It's not that hard to figure that Euron just defeats whoever takes the sword at some later date and says, yeah, this sword has the right name for me. That would be.
Now, Aziz, I want to ask you another question,
Sure.
and I know it's not in the document, and I think it's very tinfoily, but I do want to just kind of get your thoughts on it. There's been some speculation that Longclaw, like how did the Mormonts come into possession with Longclaw? And I've even heard people speculate that Longclaw is a hidden lost sword. Do you believe that at all, or do you think there's anything to that?
I don't think it's a hidden lost sword, because it doesn't correspond to one in particular. Like, it could be Blackfyre. I don't see how, because they've had it for so long, so that doesn't really fit. Dark Sister's too small, so it can't be that.
Right.
So yeah, I just don't know which one it would be, and apparently they've had it for quite a while, so like a few hundred years.
Unless that's a lie, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's possible. That's possible.
It could be in their best interest to lie about it, but yeah, I've always just wondered about Longclaw.
It is
Like,
a curiosity, because you're right. It's like, how did very, very poor House Mormont, who they've notate how poor they are, how did they get a hold of this weapon?
Yeah.
Well, it's probably some brave deed or some service they did for someone. That is the only conclusion I can think of, because you're right. It couldn't be money. Probably. Probably couldn't be money.
I will just bring up, in terms of the idea that it is Blackfyre, just the fact that Bloodraven was at the wall up north, it's worth at least mentioning that.
Yes.
And the fact that, Jorah, that Gior, that he just gave it to Jon.
Yeah.
Which is kind of
Which
weird
has always been a
to
little
give
odd,
your
yeah.
ancestral sword to someone. Unless it isn't really your ancestral sword. But no, I don't really think it's Blackfyre hidden, but I do agree that it's a little weird.
But you know what? Actually, the example of Gior is interesting in using it to frame the way Valyrian steel is viewed in the Seven Kingdoms. Like, he did just set it aside and kind of forget about it. Like, it seems hard for us to fathom that such a thing would be forgotten about, but that is what happened. I mean, Jorah, he was ashamed of it, and he's just like, stop thinking about it. And then he was like, oh yeah, when it got burned up in the fire, he's like, oh yeah, I have this Valyrian steel sword.
For those people who believe Corn Halfhand is Arthur Dayne, there's some maybe a thread of hope for you still.
So let's talk about Dark Sister. We have done a whole episode on Dark Sister, but since then, there's been an update, a very direct from the source update. A few of you have heard this clip before, but it bears repeating. Here we go.
Yeah, here's a little clip.
She is the best.
Yeah, here's a little clip of me asking. This was at an event outside Worldcon in 2018 in San Jose. Here's a little 20-second clip.
Did Bloodraven take Dark Sister with him to the wall, his sword?
Did Bloodraven take Blood Sister with him?
Dark Sister.
Dark Sister. Yes, he did.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much.
There was no hemming and hawing there. That was a very direct yes. Like, he's not like, let me think about it. That was yes.
As soon as he heard what it was, he was like, yes. Yeah, that's rare.
Something that he had decided already. Yeah, like, this is something that was already in his mind, basically. It wasn't like something he had to ponder. Like, boom, yes. Like, that was emphatic. So that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, I think that says just as much as him saying yes, period. I think that on its own also is indicative of a lot.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, Tommy. We couldn't hear you for a second. I muted you because of the audio playing. It was just for that moment, but just go on and say how much you appreciate me and how awesome I am. That's what you were saying.
Just saying. I was saying that this is such a contribution to the community. Like, you guys do so. I mean, your guys' episodes in and of themselves are a contribution to the community. They do so much for so many people, not just from an informational standpoint, but just from bringing people together in a community standpoint. But then to be able to like actually contribute to the knowledge growth of us. We're all thirsty for this. We're all waiting for that next book. And any bit of confirmation or new information we can get, it just seems so golden. And for Ashea and Aziz, you guys, to bring us this sort of confirmation, it's just such a testament for you guys, and it's just amazing. I can't imagine being. I try to put myself in your shoes, Ashea, and it's just like I would probably not stop bragging forever. This would be something I would always say. Yeah,
I was very glad that I asked it, and that people were immediately like, "Woo, yeah!" They applauded. That the audience appreciated that. Hey, this was new news, and I want to share this with everyone. If you are going to ask George a question, make it succinct. Make it yes or no. Yeah, that's your best chance. We've asked him enough questions that we've kind of gotten burned a few times. I as much as I love that time I got that question answered, there's been other times, one time in particular, that I got a question quote answered that had me like about to cry the first time I asked a question, because he did not answer my question well at all. So I have learned my lesson. So take heed from that, and maybe you'll get a good answer out of him too.
Well said, y'all. Yeah, it was
said.
a really exciting moment.
Said.
Good said.
Good said. Yes. What am I doing?
Said.
I'm saying the wrong word. Good said. So he's got it with him. He took it with him to the wall. There's very little reason to think he didn't have it with him when he went on a raid. Like, why is he going to go on a ranging and not take his sword with him? So yeah, he's got it with him. Most certainly, when he went to the cave, he probably sitting there in the cave somewhere. He didn't mention it because he's a tree. Why would he mention it? It's the same thing as Jorah or Gior just kind of forgot he had it. Like, I'm a tree now. What do I need with a sword? So there's two main options here for its immediate use. Of course, long term, there's a theory that could end up with Arya. Her name, the name of it being Dark Sister, sort of suggests that possibility.
I'm a big fan of that.
Cool. Yeah, like that fits. In the short term, though, Mira could wield it. She's really the only candidate.
Yeah, who else is going to escape? Yeah.
But there is one other candidate, actually. The idea of Hodor being used by Bran, like as warging into him. We've seen him do that already, and it's been alluded to, like, what if Hodor and I fought together as one? And Lewin says, no, you can't do that. A person has to be of one mind when they're fighting, and it's like, well, and we have this notion of Simeon Star Eyes, who was blind yet he could fight, and he had sapphire eyes, and well, the sapphire eyes are sort of a notation of the power of the old gods, right? The others have their sapphire eyes. Aemond One Eye has a sapphire eye, so I think that's a possibility as well, that Bran will use Hodor to be a warrior. We did see that in the TV show. So, and we already saw it in the books when he makes him shut up. When they're afraid he's going to bring the free folk down on them. So, what do you think of those? Do you favor either of those ideas, or maybe a third idea?
Well, I see all those ideas, and I don't think any of them are mutually exclusive.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, right. It could go pass from all of them. Yeah, you're right.
Hodor fights. It goes to Mira, goes to Arya.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a very organic way that it happens that way, and I think that there's no reason for me to believe that it doesn't happen that way.
How tiny does Dark Sister look in Hodor's hand? Is it like a dagger? Not quite.
I mean, it has to look like someone like fighting with a stick, right? Just like a huge dude fighting with a stick, but at the same time, like, give me that. I mean, the hold the door scene in the show is probably one of the last show elements that was really meaningful and like left a lasting impression, an emotional impression. So like me envisioning George doing that with Hodor wielding the sword and potentially Mira picking it up, as Hodor's being overwhelmed. I think that's I do think that there's some very real possibilities for that.
Yeah, it fits really well. It's not quite like Blackfyre, where it really just seems like there's only one place it can pop up, but it's similar in that it's narrowed down a lot. The options are not like, it's like, well, I could go to, I don't know. No, it just doesn't. Long term, anything can happen, but in the short term, when it's in such a specific location like that, there's only a few people around. The conclusions are fairly straightforward, but George could always surprise us.
And not to mention that Dark Sister kind of is like a fluid sword anyway. Like its history kind of like passes from person to person to person. It's not like it's not as if Blackfyre where it has this. I mean, there is an allure to it. There is a connotation that comes with it, but also it's not as if you need to be the power source to wield it.
Yeah.
It just kind of goes from person who is most likely to be deadly with it to person who's most likely to be deadly with it.
It was always second fiddle. Yeah, it was only held by Targaryen kings who became kings. It was never like in the possession of a king as their main sword before they became when they were actually kings. So yeah, you're right. It's always kind of been second fiddle to Blackfyre,
but also in possession of fan favorites to a certain degree, right? Like Aemon the Dragon Knight. Everyone loves Aemon the Dragon Knight. Targaryen, the Rogue Prince. People love Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince. Visenya, for better or worse, people like Visenya. So if it goes from Hodor to Mira to Arya, I mean, though I can't think of, I'm sure I could, but like those are fan favorites, right? Like people love those characters, right? If it went in that route, like no one would be mad.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. That would be fan servicey, but the best kind, because it wouldn't be going out of his way. It would be something that he probably has already planned to some degree.
Right.
We're just hoping we get what we think we're going to get. All right, let's talk about our final section. We've also got a section of questions stored up here, but our final prepared section is on the Lysine connection. House Rogare, who have some blood of Valyria themselves, they are Lysine after all, and that was the the Dragon Lord party spot. Lots of blood of Valyria there. They give us two examples of Valyrian Steel items. There may be long shots to reappear because they're in Essos instead of Westeros, but that's not going to stop us from talking about them. First, a reminder of who they were. The Rogares, for a short while, the Rogare Bank was more powerful even than the Iron Bank, which tells you why they didn't last very long as that spot. Because the Iron Bank wasn't too happy about that. And Lara Rogare married Prince Viserys, the same Viserys who became Han for over 20 years, and then he became King Viserys II, but only for about 1 year. When they were married, Lara had a few of her retainers with her. One in particular stood out above the others, quite literally. Sandok the Shadow, and as cool as he was, we want to make sure we focus on his sword. So here's the quote.
A great curved sword with dragonbone hilt, whose dark blade shone in the torchlight with the distinctive ripples of Valyrian steel.
Oh, yeah. So former pit fighter, 7 foot tall, gruesomely scarred, illiterate, mute, musically gifted, though. Played the harp of some sort of harp type instrument that wasn't a Westerosi instrument, so they didn't know exactly what to make of it. And, of course, this sword is what we're focused on here. The Secret Siege is a really important event near the end of Fire and Blood that maybe gives us some parallels to what's going to happen in the north with the others potentially putting a siege on the Nightfall and or Winterfell or maybe other places. So while we go through this part, just keep your thoughts open to parallels here, such as Sandok. Now, if he happened to join the Night's Watch, he wouldn't need new clothing. He already dresses in all black, right? And this is awesome moment where he single-handedly holds a bridge from a Knight of the Kingsguard and some of his men. Now, how many times have we pointed out the parallels between Kingsguard knights and the others? They get called White Shadows. Their cloaks are described as snowy. And then, as you alluded to earlier, this is a connection to something we talked about before. We got a peak here. And Sandok slays Sir Amory sort of last of all. He kills his men, and then Amory, well, you can't call him a coward for sure. The guy just still goes right at Sandok, which sounds... You got to be brave to do that. I mean, we just described the man. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. This is like probably one of my favorite parts of Fire and Blood, by the way.
Yeah.
This Secret Siege.
It is cool.
I mean, it's amazing. And you talk about the parallels to potential we've seen in the future. What about a parallel to something we've seen in the past? What about a parallel to the Tower of Joy?
Yes, it does.
Well, this is a little bit inversed, where you have, instead of the Ned and his party, the 7-on-3, right, where the Knights of the Kingsguard are protecting the tower, you have a flip side. The Knights of the Kingsguard are attacking, and you have an overwhelming host coming at an underwhelmed party,
and they don't want to fight. One side is like, we don't want to fight, but the other side is like, we must.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, 100%. There's another parallel. Yeah,
and there's another parallel too, potentially, with this sword, and it may be the same sword. There's a chance. It's a good question. You ask, is his sword an Arak? And it's not clear. So here's another quote that helps us maybe identify where the sword might be. There's at least a chance.
Yeah, it says, there were hundreds of Valyrian longswords in the world, but only a handful of Valyrian Araks.
That comes from one of Quentin's chapters, and it's in reference to Kago Corpse Killer. And he has a Valyrian steel Arak with the Dragonbone hilt. Now, I'm sorry, not with the Dragonbone hilt. We don't know what the hilt is. I went looking and was like, oh boy, if this one has a Dragonbone hilt, that's really going to narrow it down. But it doesn't. The hilt is not described, so it could be that. But it says only a handful of Valyrian Araks. Now, if we take that literally, then there's only a few, and thus, otherwise, it would be kind of absurd to connect this dot, because, like, well, there's the only thing they have in common is they're both curved. But given that there's so few of these, it really might be the same one. There's other parallels. Kago and Sandok are both huge. They're both deadly, dark-skinned men with lots of facial scars. Of course, elsewhere, we've gone over the parallels between Sandok and Sandor, but that's not necessarily relevant to the sword here, but it is certainly worth mentioning because it's pretty cool, especially since Sandor himself also used to be a Kingsguard. So Viserys, Lara, Sandok, and King Aegon stayed in the Red Keep another 18 days after that fight on the bridge, and they undid the plot. They reclaimed the throne. That was in 135 AC, so about 4 years after the Dance of the Dragons. And 4 years after that, in 139, Lara Rogari left Westeros for good. Sandok may or may not have gone with her. We don't know. Now, one example we thought of to compare here is Areo Hotah. Areo Hotah, also somewhat of a parallel to Sandok in a lot of ways, came as Melario's protector, right? That was his purpose of being there. He protected her. But when she left, he didn't go with her. I think the point was that she didn't need protection when she's going back home. She needed protection in this foreign land where there's, people who don't like foreigners or people who want to kill her because she's a powerful woman. But if she just goes back home and doesn't participate in the ruling of Dorne, no one's going to care. There's no reason to kill her. So with that in mind, do you think maybe Sandok stayed around, or just tell us what you think about Sandok?
Yeah, no, I like to think that Areo Hotah is the parallel in this case, right? Like, we get so many parallels from Sandok. We were talking about that offline. You've mentioned Sandor with, being a member of the Kingsguard, scarred face. Areo Hotah, you mentioned his proclivity for beautiful music. That reminds me of Mance and wearing his black, right? Mance Rayder is a former member of the Night's Watch. And also, I said there was an exchange between Aegon and Marson Waters, where Marson Waters refers to Sandok as a beast, and Aegon says he's no beast. He may not speak, but he listens and he takes orders. And to me, that reminds me of Gregor,
Yes.
the Franken Mountain. And so I think there's a lot of parallels here. I do happen to believe that we're going to see something, whether it is. And so this is, again, I mentioned one kind of crackpot theory I had. Here's another one, this idea that history is cyclical, right? This reminds me of the Tower of Joy. The Tower of Joy, we've heard, other people kind of theorize, could be another parallel to the past with something that happened during the Long Night,
Yeah.
or the Prince that was promised. And if we have this, just thinking back to the Tower of Joy, we have the Night's Watch, not the Night's Watch, but the Kingsguard defending from Ned and his group. And then you go back a little bit further back, and we have this man who's dressed for all intents and purposes in Night's Watch gear, like all black,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he's now protecting from the white, the Kingsguard coming in. So it's a reversal of roles to a little bit. So now you go back and you kind of imagine, is there a situation during the Long Night, again, total tinfoil, where you have the Night's Queen in the Night Fort giving birth to some sort of half baby.
Whoa.
And there is, the prince that was promised has also been attached to this idea that there is a pact. There was a prince that was promised. Perhaps there was a baby taken from the Night's Queen, and there was supposed to be something given back later.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. Like if you're saying that this is perchance, something that we're going to see in Winds of Winter, and we have, John being the Aegon 3 stand-on, right? And maybe Sandor or the Franken Mountain on the bridge, and the others coming in, and Dany's in there with a baby that perhaps is John's, or whatever the case may be. Maybe this is the prince that was promised. Maybe this is the retelling of this story again, history repeating itself. I don't know. But I kind of like that idea.
Cool,
Again,
yeah.
It's total tinfoil. There's not a lot there, but it could happen.
Well, building on your idea too about the mountain, like just imagine that Cersei gets trapped in the Red Keep and won't come out, and the mountain is
Right.
sort of like standing there on the drawbridge, like, nope, no one gets in. And like, yeah, well, who wants to go face that? A silent giant that no one can defeat, and even 12 on 1, 20 on 1, it just won't matter. Yeah. So there is.
And if you look at Doug Wheatley's art, sorry not to interrupt you, but Doug Wheatley's art of Sandok
so
looks
big.
very much.
Yeah.
It looks like Gregor. It looks like Gregor from the show.
Yeah, he's bigger than you'd think, even just with the description of 7 feet tall, because he's so wide. Like, yeah.
Yes. Like that was something that I was taking away. I was like looking at the art yesterday. I was like, holy cow, he looks like the Franken Mountain.
Yeah, and the mountain casts a shadow in that scene. The first time we see him is before we actually meet him, he's in that Bran's vision casting a shadow blocking the sun over Jaime and Sansa and them. So that's pretty. There's a lot of parallels here. There's a lot of richness to this connection. Yeah, for sure. And a lot of it's going to turn out to be gardening. Like George won't end up connecting some of these dots probably, but I bet you some of what we just said plays out, if not more. Our last item is truth. Truth. Here's a quote.
Yes. That Lord Moredo was a fearsome fighter, none could doubt. Tall and stern, with white blonde hair and blazing blue eyes, he looked the very image of a warrior of old Valyria. Men said, and bore a long sword of Valyrian steel he called truth.
So this is Lara Rogara's brother. So not just another random Lysine person. This is a family that had indirectly had 2 Valyrian steel blades. They didn't own Sandok's sword, but he was their employee. So they basically could decide where it went, I suppose. And Moredo, though, interestingly, he launched an attack on Lys after the fall of his family, after the Iron Bank maybe murdered a couple of their members and other stuff that didn't have anything to do with the Iron Bank, or maybe did, not really sure. Certainly one of his family members was very bad at managing this bank situation. So either way, we don't know what happened. If Fire and Blood says this is outside of the scope of our history, fair play. We wanted to know, but I guess it kind of was. All this Lysine history is You know, a little bit makes sense to. He's got to stop somewhere, but Laura was able to go home. She went back there in 139, 3 years after her brother invaded the place, like attacked the whole city. So you figure the attack went pretty well, or else she might not have been allowed to go back. Like she wasn't exiled, her family wasn't exiled or anything like that. It was only 3 years, so like you'd think they would remember. So that he probably won. So this sword might just still be in lease somewhere. Sandok's might be as well, if Sandok's is not Kago's sword. And the Rhaegar family is one thing. Like, will they pop back up in the story? Maybe not. They may not even exist anymore. No one may even go to Lys. Maybe Dany will stop there on her way coming back. Maybe we'll hear about things happening there off page. But it is at least a segue to the concept. A banking family with powerful ties to anything or otherwise owning Valyrian steel begs the question, does the Iron Bank have Valyrian steel? Do the Faceless Men have any? The House of Black and White, do they have any stash there?
It's not the Valyrian Steel Bank.
It's the Iron Bank. That's true. What does that thought do for you, Tommy? Do you think about maybe the House of Black and White maybe having a stash there? Like, you know, they've taken in so many things over the years. Maybe they've got some of that. Arya's certainly imagined what treasures they have buried down there, and she wonders where it is. Like, you know, where's the treasure vault? I found the rooms with the clothes. I found the room with this. Where does all the money go? And we have that same question. But, you know, when we're dealing with such absurd amounts of wealth that they got to have fancy stuff too. Like the Sea Lord had dragon eggs in the era of the Sun Chaser. So what other stuff do they have? Is this in that wheelhouse, do you think?
Yeah, you know, I look at the Iron Bank in a very similar vein as I look at the Citadel, right? They're this institution that wields so much power, right? And we don't necessarily know how they wield it or all the methods in which they use to wield it. We just know that they have like an unrivaled amount of power, you know, institutionally wise. So yeah, 1,000%. If the Citadel could potentially be behind the Dance of Dragons and the death of them, as well as the disappearance of Valyrian steel, then 1,000% the Iron Bank and Faceless Men could be behind it just as easily.
Yeah, like they obviously aren't cool with slavery. They're not big on dragons, but dragon steel, why not? What's wrong with that? Yeah, so.
Right, 1,000%. Why not just accumulate as much wealth as possible? They don't seem to really have a lot of moralistic kind of like hems and haws in the process. It's just a matter of, you know, you guys have talked a lot of times about the possibility that they're backing two sides of the same coin in certain cases, right? Like the Koch brothers. It's like they're not just like putting their money into one fight; they're spreading their money amongst all of the fights. So no matter who wins, they win, right? So yes, 1,000%.
Imagine that being a gift for like a victorious, and like we've got something we like in honor of your great win, you know, just to build their friendship, they hook them up with a piece of Valyrian steel or something.
Yeah,
pretty fancy gift, but hey.
What better way to cement that friendship, right?
Yeah, a gift worthy of a queen or a king or whatever. Yeah, it could see it, could definitely see it. Let's take some questions from you all. There's a nice stash of questions here built up. You guys have clearly responded well to this topic. Will Moss, the Sword of the Mid-Afternoon, about 3:30, asks, wouldn't wielding Blackfyre make Aegon look more like a Blackfyre pretender than a true Targaryen? Well, to someone, sure, but to a lot of readers, for definitely. But I think the sword was Targaryen longer than it was Blackfyre, although it was Blackfyre more recently. So it's actually a good question. I don't know. Like, we obviously can't speak for all of Westeros and what they'll think.
Yeah, I think it would be mixed, right? Some people would take it as an indication that he's fake, and some people would think it meant he was real.
Yeah. I think if he's wrapped up in other explicitly Targaryen, not Blackfyre.
I guess he also has to have a reason, an excuse for how he has these things.
Yeah.
How did he get Blackfyre?
Yeah. That's a good point. Like,
I think the more important thing is something you guys have hit on a ton in past episodes, which is the idea of it's not so much who young Griff is or what he represents, it's what Dany's going to represent or what she's going to look like, which is she looks like the foreign host coming in, right? She's got Dothraki, she's got all these foreigners that are not from Westeros. They're not Westerosi, right? And we've seen that there's a lot of, just racism and stereotypes within this world against people from, she's not going to be looked at as someone from within. She's going to be looked at as an outsider with all these foreign hordes that are coming with her to help conquer. So I think, that probably speaks more so for the people in Westeros, more so than, when they see like, well, our choices are this guy, Fagon, who looks like a Targaryen and has all the Targaryen power symbols, or this dragon wench who's coming here with, all these unwanteds.
Yeah.
It's going to be an easy decision.
It really is. You're right. And another thing to point to here in relation to Will's question is it may not matter that much to current folk. Like the Targaryens have been gone for a while, and the Blackfyres have been gone even longer. And as long as this new leader looks like he's going to lead them out of this last several years of just awful ruling, of the Lannisters being terrible, of civil war, I don't know that being a Blackfyre is going to bother too many people. It might even they might not care at all. But it's a good question. It's interesting. Some people will certainly, some older Westerosi might be like, it's very peculiar there. The young folk would probably not know much about it at all, though. Level of education in Westeros being what it is.
Just based on the fact that he's not Cersei and he's not Dany, he's going to win by default.
That helps him a lot. Yeah, it's true. Okay, chat, while we're reading the rest of these questions, tell us the name of your Valyrian steel blades in the comments. Either if you're listening to this live, do it now. Afterwards, feel free to leave your comments. If you
don't just feel free to, feel encouraged.
Yes,
to.
encourage. We encourage you. So the first question I have for everyone to consider, Tommy, I would like to get your answer on this. Do you think ice will be reforged? Do you think Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper will be reconstituted into the Stark sword?
1,000%. I think you guys talked quite a bit about the Stark convergence on Winterfell in the last episode. I think this is symbolic, thematic of that, right?
Ooh,
you have the reunification of the Starks, you have the reunification of the swords. I don't really have a great idea for how this happens. I think George has said Widow's Wail is still in King's Landing, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Brienne has Oathkeeper, so you got to get the two swords together at some point, whether that happens in a Dance of Spring or Winds of Winter. My guess is it seems more plausible for a Dance of Spring or a Dream of Spring.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, I really hope for that, because that was something that, my favorite episode perhaps is episode 1 of season 4, which is Two Swords.
Oh,
that's the one where Arya regains Needle, and that's the same one that Tywin has ice forged into the two swords. I just love it. I think it's a beautiful episode. It's one of, I think, the last that George was involved in. And so, I'd love to see those two swords come back together. I just think, I'm a Stark loyalist, as many out there probably can relate to.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. I have no counter theories to offer. I think you really nailed that. Tying it to the theme of Starks coming together again is a really good way to put it.
I think it would happen after they defeat the others.
Okay. Yeah. It's not easy to do. Like, the logistically combining the sword is going to take someone.
Yeah, I think they need both swords. Like, I think it's more useful for them to have it separate
in the short term. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
Well, and they have Gendry, right? Gendry's
that's true.
Loyal to Arya.
Gendry worked for Tabo Mott. Yeah.
Tabo Mott. So he's one of the few people that could potentially put the swords back together.
That is a good point. And actually, we have a question related to that. Let's jump to that one. Eric Forg asked, since Valyrian magic is rooted in blood and sacrifice, what do we surmise Tabho's spells entail? He doesn't seem like the type of guy that would sacrifice orphans from Flea Bottom. Also, the only profession that is cooler than being a wizard or a blacksmith has to be one in which you are a wizard blacksmith. Good point, Eric.
True. Very true.
And, well, yeah, it's true that we're told the forging of Valyrian steel requires sacrifice, perhaps unwilling sacrifice, potentially, well, as most of them are. But Tabo strikes me as someone who may have used that phrase when he's talking to Ty, when he says, the spells I use, this and that. I'm like, are they really spells, or is he just saying that? Is this the trappings of power for a blacksmith? That version of trappings of power for a blacksmith, just saying, yeah, just, I did all my spells. And it was like, spells, really? But if there are spells, it would be something kind of simple, just something, I don't know, yeah, wizard blacksmith, who knows? But I'm guessing there's not actually any magic involved. He just says that. But he does have advanced knowledge. I mean, we're told Valyrian steel cannot be melted down by normal forges. So he's got something going on there. I'm guessing it's just advanced knowledge that he calls spells, like Euron does with his advanced seamanship. He's like, how did he controls the winds? Like, nah, dude, that's just masterful sailing.
Right.
I think
he just knows how to get a real hot fire.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's what it is too. Yeah, he knows how to get a fire hotter than normal blacksmiths do. Qohor seems to have that advanced knowledge. They've surpassed the rest of the blacksmiths in the world, at least in that regard. So. Yeah.
But imagine a situation where, fast forward in the Winds of Winter and it's Gendry and he's talking to Arya and he's like, yeah, I don't really understand this, but Tobo said like a little bit of my blood just helps this sword become magical, right? Like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm, I have a famous parent. I don't know.
That would be really quite a
my
twist.
Blood. Yeah. I don't know. Don't ask me why my blood works for this, but I'm just going to put a little bit on there and Alakazam, you got Valyrian.
Well, we'll really find out is that Gendry was going to be the next sacrifice. We're like, yeah, right. It's like, but I showed a talent for metalworking, so he let me live.
True.
So it was Emily of the Eyrie. Shout out to her and the Isle of Faces podcast with Joe Buckley, who got me on the train of thinking about the amount of metal in a plate armor. And I also looked up helmets. Like a helmet alone takes twice as much metal as a sword, generally speaking, roughly. So and helmets are obviously a pretty important part of a suit of armor. Even if not directly connected, it's still, you got to have it. You got to have a helmet. Julie Allardyce says, isn't armor fitted to a person? If so, maybe Euron got it made somehow. Well, I wonder. Maybe he got it refitted, but it's got all those runes on it. Yeah, I kind of wonder where he could have possibly had that done, but it is possible. Any thoughts on that, Tommy?
I mean, I guess outside of what you just theorized, the idea if he were able to come across something like and I don't believe that this happened, but if they had something like an Iron Throne, right? Mm-hmm. That he came across in Valyria or his slaves found in Valyria, and he was able to just be like, hey, yeah, I've got all this Valyrian steel, but it's not usable in the realm of a sword. How can we make this work? And someone was like, well, a Tobo Mott type person was like, well, I could turn it into armor, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, my gut is that he found the armor intact, or not he, but someone within his party found the armor intact, and he just put it on.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, wow, it fits. How about that? Close enough.
Magic.
Yeah. Screenwriter Catherine Van Pelt says, I have two questions. Has Lightbringer been confirmed as Valyrian steel? And if the proper blood rights, intent, and smithing take place, could any Valyrian steel sword have the potential to be a quote-unquote Lightbringer? So I believe she's referring to the original story of Lightbringer, meaning the Azor Ahai thrusting it into the heart of Nissa Nissa, which was a literal sword. Because when people talk about Lightbringer now, a lot of times they think of it metaphorically, like it might be Dany's dragons, something like that. So Catherine is asking about this original version. And it's a good question because similar formula, maybe the dragon steel thing we talk about in Sam's readings might be a clue that Valyrian steel is a rediscovered technique. And maybe there's some variations in it, but the idea being that some other society figured this out, then they lost the technology. Valyrians refigured it out, something similar like that. Because the story of Azor Ahai comes long before the Valyrian freehold would have even existed. So unless history is off, which is possible, then we're talking about two very distinct timelines that are not close at all. So, yeah. So maybe we're dealing with... So in other words, the potential to be a quote-unquote Lightbringer, I would say no. But I would say thematically, like Valyrian still comes off as kind of evil given how it's made and who made it. Like we talked a lot about how the Valyrians were nasty pieces of work. If we're to believe, and we have no reason to doubt, that it is necessary to have some sort of blood sacrifice to make Valyrian steel, is that what Azor Ahai did to Nissa Nissa? The difference could be, the twist could be that it was willing on her part. Because that is how the story's told, that she willingly gave herself up. Whereas with this Valyrian stuff, there's no willingness. These are slaves being sacrificed as far as we can tell. There's no hint whatsoever that they're willing sacrifices. But this Nissa Nissa example is different. And maybe that matters. Maybe that's why Dawn appears to be Valyrian steel in all properties except for its coloring, which is very, very different, and its shine. And maybe the willing sacrifice creates this warm, positive glow, but the the evil version is this smoky black red, kind of. I don't know. What do you think about that? I've gone off for a minute. Let me hear your takes.
Well, I really like that idea that there's potentially the willingness is what gives Dawn this milkiness color, and perhaps the more sacrificial route is what gives the blades the darker the color. And this is something we talked about when we first started kicking around the idea of this episode. I won't go into it too far because I believe it probably is several episodes in and of itself, but I do believe the Dragonbone chair, perhaps, that's a series written by Tad Williams. We've talked about how George R. Martin likes to give homages to some of his favorite authors. Tad Williams is one. House Willems is a house within Westeros. Their sigil is 3 swords and some dragon skeletons, which to me, when I first found that, I thought, we talk about thinking you're coming up on like your own first original Song of Ice and Fire theory. I was like, oh my God, what is this secret sigil that I found? Okay, it's just an homage to this old series. Then I read the series. The series, and major spoiler alert here. I'm not going to get into all the similarities the two series have, but here's a major spoiler alert for this Dragonbone chair theories. I believe it's called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is the 3 swords. But in this book series that George draws from, there are lots of parallels. Lots of parallels. The members have this idea that if they reunite these swords, if they bring together these swords, that is the secret to defeating. And this is an actual name of the character, the Storm King in the books, right? It ends up being a total it's like they're tricked, right? Yeah. It's a trick. They're bringing these swords together and it ends up backfiring, and that's what allows the Storm King to kind of like become as powerful as he needs to be, right?
Yeah.
So
it's pretty cool.
So I'm just saying there is this. I don't want to get too deep into this, but I do believe George could potentially be mining on that idea, which is we're all thinking that it's important for these swords to come together because they will help defeat the White Walkers. They're the secret. They're what's key. But there's also this backdoor chance that the idea of bringing all these swords together could backfire, and it could be something that really is the catalyst for allowing the others or a Night Queen, Night King type figure to like really unleash full hell on Westeros.
That's cool.
So I think that's something. I think that's something that's worth mentioning here because to me, when we're talking about, hey, this is cool talking about swords, right? These lost swords, it's cool, but what is the significance?
Yes.
What's the real significance of these swords? I think it falls into one of 2 categories. One, we need these swords to defeat the others, and it's going to be really important. And these swords are going to have to be put into the kind of like you're talking about. You have companies, and you're putting them into the right warriors' hands. Or this is a red herring, right? And these people are being led by prophecy, which is a sword without a hilt. To think that the secret to beating the others is bringing these swords together, when really that's the secret to helping the others unleash their full power.
That would be really quite a twist, or just building on that idea. If it isn't the others, and something directly with the swords, just some idea of humanity thinking something that's going to help them backfires, even if it's not the swords, which is along the lines of what you're saying with regards to where is this all leading? Even right. Outside, maybe it isn't directly related to Valyrian steel, but maybe it is. That's a great take.
Yeah. And if Dawn, Dawn is described as different, there's some people who believe Dawn is the original ice. And if that's the case, perhaps the Night Queen's soul is somehow stuck within Dawn, and by bringing Dawn together with these other ones, that allows them to release the Night Queen's soul. I don't know. That's just, again, real crackpot, real tinfoil, but I'm just saying, like, there are these ideas that, George is certainly pulling on that could be there.
Definitely. A couple of takes about the origins here. Austin Flowers says, what if dragons were sacrificed in the making? That would explain why they can't be forged in modern times. Instead of sacrificing people, the idea is that it's dragons. That would certainly make them much, much rarer, because sacrificing dragons would be a tough thing to do. That's a cool idea, definitely. And then related idea, Miss Man Jones says, I believe Valyrian Steel was formed with sorcery and voluntary blood sacrifice, building on a separate idea from what we said before. All the magic of Valyria contains blood and fire. The voluntary caveat would make sense because that would explain why the stuff is so rare. If it requires blood sacrifice, they shouldn't have had any trouble making lots of it if the sacrifice was unwilling, and that worked because they had so many slaves. Like, you could conceive of way more Valyrian steel in a situation like that. But if you say the sacrifice has to be willing, then you have something that works as a check on having so much of it. Something has to explain why there isn't more of it. And both of these ideas are good. The dragon idea or the willing sacrifice idea, those are pretty cool.
I enjoy both of those. I think those are excellent.
Yeah.
Miss Man.
Well, good said, y'all.
Good said, Miss Man. Good said.
And Shira Cesar says, I suspect dragon products like bone or blood are the replacement for carbon in a forge, which in the real world, you need carbon to make iron into steel. That's how you get that hotter flame. It burns out the impurities. I may not be speaking to the science properly, but that's the gist of it. You need carbon to get that extra heat to make steel work properly. So maybe there's some sort of equivalent here that George just put in that allows you to get to that level of heat. Certainly dragon products are like bone is supposedly got a higher iron content. That's why it's black, etc. So yeah, that could be. Miss Man Jones adds to that, saying, in the real world, Vikings beat animal bones into their weapons. This led to the weapons being stronger and better due to the carbon. Oh, very nice. Yeah, animal bones have carbon in them. Okay, that's cool. Will Moss again says, why is everyone so lax with the Valyrian cat's paw dagger? If even House Lannister can't get a sword, then surely a dagger is still bloody important. It is an interesting dichotomy. The daggers don't even get names, where the swords are just like highly sought after. It might relate to the fact that, I mean, you can't fight with a dagger. It's not a weapon of war. It's a sidearm. You know, it's not and these things have such prestige attached to them. And I think you would need a lot of daggers to melt down to make even one sword. They're not like half.
I believe it's even.
They're less.
Yeah, I think it's even mentioned that the cat's paw dagger was used in part because Robert wouldn't notice it was missing.
Yeah, because he had a favorite knife, and he didn't. That's the only one he used. He didn't care about anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, he don't care. So it's like, yeah, no. That I also like the idea that, I mean, and again, tinfoil, not a ton here outside of just the general description, that the Valyrian cat's paw dagger could be something that accompanied Sanduk's sword.
It's also a good example of how the setup for how George could introduce more Valyrian steel without it being too awkward. Like, where was this the whole time? Well, if you just have, I mean, the cat's paw dagger didn't even have a name. That's a fandom nickname, right? That's what the people on the show called it or whatever. So Robert wasn't likely to notice it, as you said. So these are incredibly wealthy families. Like, I used the example of George Mormont. He just forgot about the sword. Like, to us, it's kind of hard to imagine. But we're not vastly, obscenely wealthy for generations, for hundreds of years. Our family hasn't been in this position, so let alone 1 year. So it's hard for us to have the frame of reference of the level of power and wealth that these families have. So it's kind of maybe hard to wrap your head around it. But I think that fits here, that people don't care about the daggers as much. And it's not like there's Tabho mots all over the place that can melt the stuff down. Just because you have a couple of Valyrian steel items in your castle doesn't mean you have the means to, send that all over to King's Landing and have this one guy do it. You don't necessarily know that Tabho mod even exists, and we're talking about a guy who exists in King's Landing now. Was there a Cohoric Smith in King's Landing 30 years ago that could have done this? Maybe not. Maybe 100 years ago? Maybe not. So Tabho Mott might be a rarer specimen than we think, right? I mean, he's Cohoric. So, like, how many Cohoric Smiths live in Westeros?
That's an excellent point. And going back to the Aegon's crown thing, you're talking about how it could be repurposed or different things. My thought was, when I heard you say that, was Valyrian steel arrowheads.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, because we thought about that for obsidian, but why not this? Yeah,
and you guys had kind of bandied about the thoughts with Jason Concepcion about the importance of archers in the war against the others, and Theon's role with that, and I don't know. That's just another little thing to tuck away in the back of your brain for maybe later.
Yeah, definitely. The only downside to that is you shoot it, maybe you don't get it back. But so I don't know if they would want to shoot it over the wall. But if in close quarters, it makes sense. Maybe have a few for kind of like how they were they had a few obsidian tipped arrows, and they were very careful to use those at a particular time and to give them to their best archers. So yeah, might be like the special archer, like Hawkeye in Marvel has like a whole variety of arrows.
Yeah,
that's
right.
You know, it doesn't have to be the whole quiver is filled with these. You just got one or two of these for that special shot. You get a chance to take out an other. You need that arrow.
For those fans of the Monster Squad, which was a movie from the late 80s, early 90s, I'm envisioning where they're melting down the silver to make silver bullets. You know, it's like they're melting down Aegon's crown to make the Valyrian steel. I don't know. That came to mind, and it was just like such a beautiful image to me. I couldn't let go of it.
Right on. Bloody Ben, aka Scott Wortman, how's it going? Scott asks, was Nightfall recovered from the Red Kraken? Well, to make sure everyone understands where we're coming from on this one, the Red Kraken was the guy who ruled the Ironborn during the time of the Dance of the Dragons. He did his own thing. He was somewhat Euron-like, younger, very clever, cunning, brutal. It was recovered from the Red Kraken. It ended up with Sir Harris Harlaw, the Knight. And we talked about him earlier, but there's a quote here that I wanted to bring up because it helps round out some of the things we've been talking about in a way that I didn't expect it to. So thanks for the question, Bloody Ben, because it's taken us in a very interesting direction here.
Victarion wondered how Nightfall would fare against his axe. He had never fought a man armed with Valyrian steel blade, though he had thrashed young Harris Harlaw many a time when both of them were young.
So Victarion's a warrior, fighting all his life, leading the Iron Fleet, never faced Valyrian steel. Is that, to you, does that just another example of how rare the stuff is?
1,000%, yes.
Yeah, it's really, I had never really thought about it that way until Scott asked this question, and it's like, yeah, that's yet another piece to round this all out.
Yeah, and another, again, just bring home the idea that perhaps if someone's going to wield this sword, maybe it's Euron, Nightfall, the guy who's going to bring on a long night.
Yeah. We also, if we imagine how Westeros might unite to face the great threat of winter, or partially unite, I think that may be more likely that some of the houses just stay on the sidelines or treat it as if it's an exaggeration or something. Now, if we try to reconcile houses that won't give up their Valyrian steel for any price, but also don't stand on the sidelines, there's got to be some houses that are like, all right, it's for the honor of our house, we have to help fight against this great threat that, overshadows everything else. They're not going to give their Valyrian steel blades to other people, but they could maybe send some of their champions forth wielding it. And that could be, like I said, we talked about this briefly earlier, like groups of them, make sure there's a few Valyrian steel wielders in every little squadron, things like that. It sets up a lot of interesting weapons because the way warfare is performed traditionally is going to have to be done differently. Like the undead aren't going to fight in traditional ways. Right, they're not going to get in lines and march in formation. It's going to be they're going to attack at night. It's going to be all sorts of different scenario. We're going to see warfare in new ways, and I think Westeros is going to have to adapt. And this might be one of many ways they adapt. One small part of that.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I know I've thought about this a long time, and I really do envision this standoff where it just happens at Winterfell, then they retreat back, then it's at Moat Cailin, and then they retreat back, and then there's this final standoff at the Trident, right?
Yeah,
that's just in my mind how I see it. But yeah, I just think that we're headed that way. Like you said, they're going to come out of the mist. You're not going to see them. It's going to be brutal, and we're going to lose a lot of the people we love.
Right on. Well said. Dark, but well said.
Yeah.
Melissa,
good said.
Yeah, good said. Melissa L. Gill sends a super chat. Thank you for that, and says, could the significance of Valyrian steel have changed in the writing process? Yeah, I mean, as a Gardner-style writer, it's hard to say no to that. I mean, I think George, he seems to have he may have always planned to have it rise in importance throughout the series, but it's been there since the start. I guess I would lean towards yes, because he seems to have expanded on so many things. I mean, the story itself has expanded, right? It started off as a trilogy, then 4, then 5, then 7. So almost everything's been expanded on.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Totally. And I think that maybe, I don't know. I don't know how much credence I put into this, but when I read this question, one of the things that my mind jumps to, and it might not be what Melissa's talking about, it's an Alt-Shift-X video. He's a friend of the program, correct?
Absolutely. Shout out to Alt Shift X. That's right. He's
shout out to Alt.
You'll be hearing his voice pretty soon with our audio productions. Yeah.
There you go. Alt Shift X had theorized at one point that perhaps, and this is kind of going back to Brightroar, right? That Garion could be the rumored first husband of the sailor's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he was laying forth his argument for how this could be possible, he ran into the pitfall of the sailor's wife's daughter. And his talk through was that if you look at the 5-year gap and assume that Martin forgot to go back and change the sailor's wife's her daughter's age after the revision of the 5-year gap, then it fits in really nicely with her first husband could be Garion.
Okay.
So as far as like how Valyrian Steel could potentially be impacting the significance or the changing the writing process, this could be one example, of how it should have changed, but maybe was a missed opportunity to go back and retcon that or revise that.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I tend to believe that Garion is dead. That he's not the Shrouded Lord. He is not the sailor's wife's first husband, which are two theories that we didn't really entertain or talk about. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are these with a gardening type of writing style that, because you kind of plant these seeds, you could turn around and then it could change your writing process later down the road, or you could potentially change a plot line that you were thinking of going in a certain direction. And the Shrouded Lord is a great example too, because that was a chapter that George had in the book, right? He really, really liked it, took it out, then wrote it back in as a dream, then took it back out. So it's like,
really
and there's another example.
Yeah.
Right, and there's an example of something similar, right? Jaime's dream where he's standing so in the books, Jaime has a dream where he's standing vigil over Tywin's sepulcher, and he sees Joanna. And George had talked about how originally he hadn't written that as a dream. It was supposed to be more open-ended. It was supposed to be, people weren't sure if it was a ghost or if it was a dream. And it was the fact that Jaime had his golden hand in the interaction that was supposed to be the hint that it wasn't a dream, that this was really a ghost, and he changed it to be more dreamlike. So it was more open-ended, I guess. So there's there is some precedent for this where he's okay, I was going to put it in straightforward. No, I want to make it a little more ambiguous. No, I'm going to take it out. So I don't know, I do believe that the significance of Valyrian Steel, I don't know if the significance of the Valyrian Steel itself has changed, but I do believe that Valyrian Steel could have significantly changed some of the chapters that he's writing.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The more I've been thinking about it too, while you've been answering it, I've thought about it a little more. And like the way it's being used with Aegon's plotline potentially as like part of the symbolic resonance, that might be something that he changed his mind on or added to, because that some of that is altered the plans for the 5-year gap and has changed the timeline for some things. So given the fact that Dark Sister and Blackfyre aren't actually named in A Song of Ice and Fire proper at any point, they're only mentioned in the history books and the prequel stuff, like the like Duncan Egg, is certainly evidence as well that he's, now that they appear to be on the verge of reappearing, you might think that had he intended this all along, he might have mentioned them sooner, like more directly. But also there's just so many things we can't be sure of. But I agree. I think it's a pretty strong chance, and I like the way you put it too. So good said, and good question, Melissa. Yes. And that is our final question for today. So thank you very much for coming on, Tommy. This was excellent. This topic was your suggestion, by the way. Make sure everyone knows that, and it's gone very well. I've had a lot of fun with this episode. I had a lot of fun doing the research and like thinking about these things. This style of episode is something we used to do a little more of, not the live versions of it, more like the scripted content types. So I'm happy to get back into this sort of really thinking very hard about some of the stuff on the fringe of the story that we're pretty sure will become less fringy. Because this stuff is definitely on the rise, and it's super fun either way. So
yeah, it's super fun. I think that it allows everyone to flex their tinfoil muscles. And I don't know what it is about it, but it just does seem to be one of those things that a lot of people really enjoy talking about and theorizing.
Yeah, it allows us to be creative. We get to imagine, right? We're not, when there's less out there for us to be sure of, then it's appropriate to try to insert more of our own ideas to try to make it work or try to imagine what might happen. And because it's one of those things, like, if we're wrong, so what? We don't care. Right. It's gonna be fun to find out what the truth is. I have no ego wrapped up in any of these predictions, really. They're fun. That's it. So what is next? I think we've briefly talked about it, but what's next for TKOK Podcast? What do you have coming up? What do you want people to be excited about? What do you want people to know?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, get over to the TKOK Facebook group. That is the first place you want to be for any TKOK related information. Again, that's where you're going to get to vote on our movie club movies that we choose. You're going to get updates on New Dad, Pop Mom's podcast, Concerts That Made Us. These are all the podcasts that are under our umbrella right now. We're looking to grow. So I would say if you have an idea for a podcast and it's something you really want to happen, I want to make that happen for you. So reach out to me at TKOK Podcast Network at gmail.com and we can start that discussion. I do know that we have one show we're in the talks of as we speak with some of the members. It's the ancillary members of the Folkwise group. One of my loves outside of A Song of Ice and Fire is reality TV. The trashier, the better. And so I would love to get a reality TV show kind of recap. If it's Bravo related, that's even better. So we're talking to two folks over there. Death Loris primarily is my main point of contact. I'm hoping to have that podcast out.
Nice.
I mentioned Eat God See Acid. I want to get that out before year end. New Dad season 2 will be starting next week. We were going to try to do a live stream tonight, but on better thought, I just wanted to enjoy my Father's Day, really relish in my appearance here on History of Westeros.
2 pods in one day is a lot, even for a podcaster.
It is a lot. So I would say those things, check out TMC Podcast. I'd mention it's like a book club. We encourage people to watch the movies before the episodes, but full disclosure, my wife, most of the time, Lita, will listen to the episode and then watch the movie. So by no means are we asking, do it however you want. We don't give a shit. Come over to TKO Podcast, watch the movie at some point, listen to the podcast. We're on YouTube right now. We have shorter episodes that are, some of them are on your podcast players now, but I'm a little behind on getting those highlight videos up. But outside of that, one thing I want to say, and it's not about my podcast, it's about History of Westeros. No. The thing that I love, I think, about this podcast as much as anything is how much of a community type deal this is. And if you have any sort of, if you're hearing me say that and you're thinking this is fan service or lip service and it's just me kind of sucking up, listen to Aziz do the thanks here in a second, because the thanks take a while, right? And it's a true testament. They do take a while, and I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of each of your episodes because it is a true testament of what a community, type production this is. It's not just Aziz and Ashea, although they do the heavy lifting. You have Joe Buckley, you have Nina Friel, you have Emily of the Air, you have, the people in the chat too, which, I haven't seen anything from Undertaker, but Miss Man I've seen on there.
So many regulars that are contributing regularly. Great
Lady
questions.
Leaf is another one I see in there everywhere. I don't want to just
Tree Girl and Stefan B and those folks. Yeah, there's so many good.
Dornish Dame. Bloody Ben. There's so many people who are in the chat every week.
Yeah,
every week. And as a content creator, I know how hard that is for fans to do, and for you guys to have those sort of people dedicated to you guys, it's a testament to the high quality podcast you put out. It's a testament to the fact that this is a community type production. I just think that you guys are, if I was doing a tier list, you guys would be S at the very front. This is how I feel about you guys. And, I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity to come on here, even if it never happens again.
I bet we'll do it again. This went well, man. Yeah. This went well.
No, this was a dream come true for me. This was really a dream come true. I was very Unwin Peak like in my goals to get here, right? Like I killed small Jahara probably. I rigged the whole cattle call for the new queen. I'm doing everything I can, fighting dirty to
there
get
were
on
6
the show.
other guests we had lined up for today, and they all just
they just
I don't know
mysteriously disappeared. No, you guys would probably laugh if you knew how comical I've been behind the scenes about trying to get on this podcast. So thank you guys for letting me
Man,
come
you
on
earned
here.
it. This was a great episode. I'm really happy. Thanks for all you said. Like that is a lot of praise that I hope we deserve. And
well, it's the truth. It's the truth. You know, I didn't mention Claridoc, Michael Clarfeld and
it's hard
Joey
to say
and
all
Jesse.
The names, right? Yeah.
But it's just sorry. I don't want to steal your thunder, but
No, go for it.
I've listened to the podcast so many times, and I'm just thinking in the back of my head, I'm going down your thank you list. I'm like, okay, who does he think next? Okay,
there's a lot of names.
It's so many people that make this thing happen, and it's awesome. And I feel so lucky to be a part of it, to be included in names like Radio Westeros, Brendan Beefish, Joe Magician, Jason Concepcion, Nina Furiel, like all those names now. You guys are unfortunate to have Tommy Pappas in that name.
Nah, we're proud.
With you guys,
we're proud, man. You did great.
But well, I'll tell you what, I'm very, very lucky and proud to be amongst those names. So thank you guys. It's real. I'm getting a little choked up now,
thank you. You were great. This was awesome. What a fantastic podcast. You're a great member of the community, a shining light, and it's awesome that you're trying to highlight other people out there with your network and trying to bring other pods in, and that's a great thing. You're helping highlight a lot of different voices. So definitely check that out, folks. Let's continue with these thanks. I can't be. I don't think I can match that level of thanks from Tommy just now, but I can try. That's really excellent. Thank you very much, Tommy. No, I really can't express enough appreciation for your words there. And let's say, we mentioned some of our other episodes. If you guys haven't checked out, our Blackfyre series certainly came up a lot today. Dark Sister, of course. You're on Greyjoy. That one we recently bumped to the front of our episode queue because it's been coming up a lot. Thank you to Ashay, of course, off camera there. Thanks to our mods over there on the Facebook group, of which you are one, Tommy. We have our little mod chat that we have been going for years now, and that's really fun. Yeah. Good friends there. We have our group over on Flick. We have our Slack group, our Discord group. We have, like you said, Michael Clarfeld doing his thing. These maps are his babies. We have Kevin McLeod with the Valar Reedus music, Joey Townsend, Jesse Koval for the regular History of Westeros music that we've been using for years. Our Bengineer, he's joined us within the last couple of years. He's been a big part of the audio projects as well as handling our sound quality. Here Be Dragons. We always shout them out at the end of every episode. What are they doing right now? I'm going to start reading the patron names while you look that up. Thank you to our many supporters. We haven't read this list in a while. We don't read this list during Valar Reedus. Those episodes are long enough already, but this is not a Valar Reedus episode, so let's say some thanks. Our peers of the realm include the mysterious BR, Hand of the King. Lord Stephen Stark is Hand of the Queen Ashaya, who is known as the best. Titles. Lord Jim, the fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire, is Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of the Chiliad and Warden of the East. Kabeth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, is Defender of the Old Gods, Warden of the North. Lord Brendan Lannister is the Bloodline, ruler of Castle Everroar, Warden of the South. Lord James Tuttle, King of the Stepstones and Valyrian and Narrow Sea, commander of the Royal Fleet, consisting of the Narrow Fleet led by flagship Caraxes and the Bloodstone Fleet led by the flagship Prince Daemon. He has considered the idea of Valyrian steel rigging for the ship's mast and Valyrian steel tipped. What's the thing you steer the ship with? Masts? No, not masts. The rudder. Rudder. What's the wheel? What's the big wheel called? I can't believe I can't think of it.
Steering
wheel? What do they call that on a ship? I don't know what the big wheel is called. Well, Lord James Tuttle is going to make one out of all Valyrian steel. I can't believe I can't think of that.
It says ship's wheel, boat's wheel, a steering wheel. It's called a steering wheel.
Ship's wheel. Okay.
Yes, I was right.
It doesn't have a special name.
It forms part of the helm.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, these people who know more about seafaring than me would have, clearly I'm no expert. Jenny the Just is captain of the ghost ship Liberty, which vanished in the Shivering Sea over a century ago, but has recently been sighted near Volantis, if the tales can be believed. And is there Valyrian steel on that ghost ship? We'll never know. It's a ghost ship. King Beyond the Wall, Sidney Jesse, the Fallborn, is Lord of Blue Spring and the Haunted Forest. He wields a dagger of dragon glass and the Valyrian steel blade Red Frost, so he's already well equipped. Will his sword appear in the series? Who knows? Sea Lord Sean Gallagher is the Titan's Binger, owner of 9 Valyrian steel ears. That's a Valyrian steel item that we did not consider as a possibility. You know, like when you have that little horn to help you hear better, you know, like that.
That's right.
Use older folks would use. Like, what's that, Sonny? Let me get my Valyrian steel hearing device here. Araya Flint of the Mountain Flints is one of our White Walker patrons. She was captured by the Weeper only to be raised in the Valley of the Milkwater, blue eyes and golden memories. Our other White Walker patron is Alexander Greyblood. He is first of the First Men, now crowned in ice, called Silence Bringer, Wood Blinder, and the Snow of Night, wielder of the ice-forged greatsword, Pale Frost. Our small council includes Lord Benjen of House Hornwood, Master of Laws, Laura Boros, the Lady of Infinity, Master of Coin, Bloody Ben Blackwood, Master of Whisperers, Grand Maester Liam Mullen, and Drowned Dan, Lord of House Windsor, Master of Karate, and Friendship for everyone and ships. It wouldn't be an episode of History of Westeros without a reference to It's Always Sunny. I think we almost got through without one there. That was right at the last minute. Thanks to Drowned Dan for making sure we got that in there. Lords and ladies in their castles include Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell is Breaker of the Second Stone. Gregor the Toasty is Lord of the Bread Fort. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian steel machete Everglazed. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is Guardian Ranger of the Hidden 100-Acre Werewood, dual wielder of the Valyrian short swords Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise. Sharpshooter of the Werewood and Ironwood Laminated Longbow, Todd Von Oben. When you fear things cannot get worse, Snugglebunny enters the fray. The Bastard of the Wolfswood is First Forester of the Old Gods. He is sworn to House Ironwerewood. Listen for the silence. Casey Stark is of House Acres. Peter Rivers is the Pale Dragon and heir to Bloodraven. Lady Mora of House Stark is Archmistress of Apothecaries and Woods Witch. Her castle features werewood doors with painted moons. Lena Snow is the Twilight Star, bastard daughter of Dane, wife of the Trickster, and Lady of Castle Rivia. A little Witcher reference for you there. Lady Amy Blackfyre, analyzer of Eastern symbolism, is lover of poles and dismantler of the patriarchy. You go, Amy. Jason Stark is second son of the North, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Bloodbath, Lord of Castle Whitewood. The chill is real. Nice motto. Our King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Fate, and he is indeed steady. Our Queen's High Council includes Rebea Stareyes, Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadowcat. In the shadows we bear our claws. Grand Archmaester Rennie, whose rod and ring and mask are Quartz Crystal, wielder of the Valyrian steel pen. Fire and Ink, there's another one. The Purple Lord Leo Anansi is Master of Whispers. Lady Wolfbird is Mistress of the Eastern Rivers, Gatekeeper of the Northern Skies, Daughter of the Silver Sea, and Master of Coin. Lady Carlin Carey is of Castle Stonesharp, whose horse is shod in Valyrian steel, prime rider of the Rising Hills, and Master of Laws. Valyrian steel horse hooves, that's a different one. That's really nice. The horses would appreciate that because it's lighter, right?
That's right.
A stallion shod in Valyrian steel could run like no horse has ever done. Our King's Guard includes Lord Commander Namian of House Darklin, who wields the Night Slayer, or who is the Night Slayer, and he wields the Valyrian sword Onyx Abyss. That's a good one. Sir Dean the White is Knight of the Black Star. Gregor Snow is called Snow Bear, and he is a bastard of Winterfell. Vaughn of House Firster, his sigil is a mailed fist with an extended forefinger and pinky on light blue field, saying, Visenya let us hold Dark Sister once. Sir Bateman is the Dark Knight. Sir Roland de Stark is the gunslinger knight of the Winter Kings, back from a 20-year ranging to the lands of always winter to protect my King Aziz. Well, thank you, Roland. I feel very safe with you at my back. And that, of course, is a cool reference to Stephen King. Stephen King. King Stephen. I almost said, I was like getting that backwards there. Night King Stephen would be an appropriate title for Stephen King. The Prolific. Our Queen's Guard is led by, who is this? Lord Captain Commander Haema Helmont, the Sellsword Sentinel? Who might
That's right.
be?
I don't know. I heard he's really good looking though too.
I hear he's got a podcast network, the TKOK or something. TKOK, is that how you say that?
Yeah, we refer to it as the TKOK.
We got a question in the chat earlier, but we were all talking. But what does TKOK stand for?
Oh yeah,
So it's not great, but I mentioned earlier in the beginning that I had this dream, right? That I started this podcast network with a friend who is also married to one of my best friends. She's a content creator from Pop Mom's podcast, Kate Flynn. So TKOK stands for Tom and Kate's OK Podcast Network.
Oh, how sweet. I was I don't know, the King of Kings podcast?
No. Tom and Kate's OK Podcast Network. We're okay. We're okay.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Also, we have Sir Rambo, Knight of House Gannon, First Blood. Amber the Adamant, the Knight of the Mist and Mother of Squids. The Wintry Wolverine, we finish what you begin. Nora Neko. And Archmaester Vena, whose ring, rod, and mask are made of steel, not pudding. The Beard Guard is led by Lord Commander George the Golden, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor, who is married to one of the biggest beards in the fandom. That would be Sean of House Beard, who returns next week for our Dunk and Egg coverage. Woohoo.
Yes.
Yeah. Sir Jeff is Warden of the AC, wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard of Platinum, Red, and Brown. Stay frosty. Also, let's get a shout out for our followers of the Seven, a.k.a. the Radio Westeros Dancers. Direwolf of the Rainwood, Mallory Sand, Witch of the Storm, Wolf Rider of Zulfric the Black Beast. That is Sanrixian, my friends. Check out sanrixian.threadless.com. Did I get it right this time? I think that's right. But Sanrixian's site, her art and her shirts, they are among the best there is in our fandom. And just in general, if I may say.
Amen.
Sir Aeron of Black Tide is Knight of the Jade Wave. Great name. Scott Alexander, Prince of Dragonflies. Lord Brock of House Blacktree, the Badger King. Bailey Bloodaxe, the Warrior's Chosen. Favored Ani of Stony Sept, a.k.a. Ani the Graceful. Sir Source Delica of House Gramercy. Lady Dillsdale, the Starspear of Crescent Hill, Mistress of the Dornish Marches. Drugar, Mad Dog of the Northern Fjords. Devoralin Blackwood, maker of the Frozen Fury Muscle Balm. It's eucalyptus and mint leaves washed with Dornish peppers and sealed by fire ants. Now that's a new product that all must have. And there's Mirt, champion of Skagos, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Club, Dragontail. All men must eat. Indeed, we all must. And after a 3-hour podcast, that's particularly appropriate. Thank you, everybody. Last but not least, we have our History of Westeros Night's Watch. That is led by Lord Commander Richard the Ligerheart, wielder of Barry's Anklebreaker, a flail with blue and silver Valyrian steel spikes. Motto, Go Blue. And we have First Builder Magor Snow, a.k.a. Magor the Cool, the Fire in the Snow. First Ranger Liam, a.k.a. Sir Waiting on a Nickname. Sir, and then First Steward Sir Jurion of the Torrentine, called Pale Wind. Yeah, all right, folks. Thank you very much. What a great episode. A lot of fun. It was fun to do a different style topic from what we've been doing the last several months. And we'll be looking forward to more of those in the future. Thanks.
Aziz, I have one more thing real quick. I have some art from Ed Sheeran, who's a friend of the program. And here we have Dark Sister and Blackfyre that he had done for us. And then also, here, let me go. All blades or steel that we talked about today. We have Brightroar and the Celtigar Axe.
Whoa. Well, folks, if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you check out the videos. You can see these.
Yes, make sure you do. They're very, very cool. We used the art for Dark Sister. It was very useful to us when we did our Dark Sister episode, actually.
That's right. Ed
very
Shear.
grateful
Shout out to Ed
for
Shear.
it.
Cheese and pencils.
So just shout out to Ed Shear. You're a fantastic artist, fantastic member of your guys' community.
Ed Shear also is the one who does our hatchling dragon art for Dragon Riders.
There's pretty good amount of Ed Sheer art on History of Westeros over the years, for sure. And just in general, out in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom and elsewhere. So thanks to Ed, thanks to everybody else, thanks to Tommy, thanks to Ashea, thanks to all you who came for the live audience, thanks to all of our patrons, thanks to everyone who asked questions, thanks to everyone who participates in the community in any manner, large or small. You are valuable, you are included, and we look forward to experiencing more of this community as we move forward. We're here for the long term, folks. We'll be here a long time. And we'll see you next week. We'll see you in years, and we'll see you next week. Adios, folks. Valar Rereadus.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
All right.